Okay, members, good afternoon and welcome to this afternoon's sitting of the Education Committee. We'll just cover the general housekeeping first. So I'd advise members that the committee meeting will be recorded and broadcast throughout Parliament buildings and online. And I would advise anyone in the public gallery that they're welcome to use mobile devices as long as they're in airplane mode and that all devices are muted and it's not permitted to take photographs or record any part of the meeting. So that moves us on to item 1 on the agenda, and that's apologies. So I have an apology from Gary Middleton, and just to highlight that Cara and I think potentially John are joining us online, and as usual any technical issues or glitches just advise through the clerk. Any other apologies from any other members? No. Okay, so item 2 is chairperson's business. Just a couple of quick things. So the clerk to the committee is not able to join us this week. She's away on assembly business. So very grateful to James for stepping in to cover today. So thank you for giving up your time for the education committee this week. And then I also just wanted to highlight one other item very briefly, and we may cover this in a little bit more detail next week. It was just to draw members' attention to the informal briefing that we had this week with a young man, Kingston Briers, who has been through the education system, attended a special school, and had specifically asked to brief the committee in relation to the SEN inquiry around his experiences of the education system as a young person with additional needs and a disability. For any of the members who were there, I'm sure will agree with me, it was a really, really powerful briefing, and Kingston set out a whole range of I think of really quite thought-provoking issues, particularly even around the language they use when we speak about young people with disabilities. So I'm hoping that recording should be available, Jim, potentially, but we can maybe speak to it in more detail next week when members have had the opportunity to listen to the briefing. But I would encourage all members to do that, and I know I would just like to put formally on the public record my thanks to Kingston for sharing his own personal experiences so articulately, but also add that thanks to the YMCA for facilitating the online meeting with him there at their premises. I think it was in Portadown perhaps. So just to note that in relation to Kingston. So that takes us then on to item 3, which is declarations of interest. Do any members have any declarations they wish to make about any item on the agenda? No, if anything should arise, obviously just indicate and make that known. Item 4 on the agenda is matters arising. I don't have anything for matters arising unless any members have anything to add. No. Item 5 is draft minutes. So I would refer you to the draft minutes of our committee meeting of the 14th of January 26, and that's at page 8 of your packs. Can I get agreement from members that the minutes are a complete and accurate record of proceedings? Is that agreed? Agreed. Okay. Thank you. Okay, members, so are our witnesses here for item 6 then? So item 6 on the agenda, it is part of the ongoing inquiry into SEN provision and transformation, and we have an oral briefing here today from the Northern Ireland Commissioner for Children and Young People. So just while the witnesses are coming through, I draw members' attention to a briefing note from the clerk at page 15 of your packs, and then a submission from the Commissioner at page 17, and the previous Children's Commissioner's report, the Too Little Too Late report at page 24. So just let the witnesses get seated there. You're both very welcome. Just to do quick introductions, we have joining us today Chris Quinn, the Commissioner for Children and Young People for Northern Ireland, and Joanne McGurk, who is the Head of Legal and Investigations at the Commissioner's Office. So you're both very welcome. I don't think Chris or your office need any particular introduction. I think anybody around the table is familiar with your work, but if there's anything obviously you want to do in terms of general introductions, you're obviously free to do so. Very glad to have you here to contribute on this issue around SEN. I think it's important noting that some of those reports, and particularly that Too Little Too Late report into SEN by the Commissioner's Office, has been really instrumental in getting a lot of these issues onto the public agenda. and to give voice to some of the experiences of children and parents navigating the system. And I think even this inquiry we're having now, probably a lot of that does track back to that work that your office did, and I know that you continue to do a lot of work in this space. So we're very glad to have you here. I'll hand over to you really to make any opening remarks or presentation. I would ask for that to be up to 10 minutes, okay. And then we'll move to questions with members. And if I could ask members just in relation to time, we'll try and keep our each individual contribution to 5 minutes per interaction to help us get through the agenda. But other than that, I will hand over to you, Chris.
Okay, thank you. So Chair, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to speak today. As Commissioner for Children and Young People, my statutory duty under the NICCY 2003 order is clear: to safeguard and promote the rights and best interests of children and young people, and to advise government and relevant authorities on law, policy and practice affecting those rights. In doing so, I am guided by the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, which requires that every child has access to an effective, inclusive education that enables them to reach their full potential. So today's discussion on special educational needs provision and the transformation agenda is critical. For too long, the SEN system has been characterised by delays, complexity and barriers that prevent children from accessing the support they need. So NICCY's review, which you referenced there in 2022, Too Little Too Late, and subsequent advice papers have highlighted systemic failings, including excessive delays in statutory assessment and statementing, and a lack of early identification and intervention of children's needs, insufficient capacity and resources in schools and support services, poor coordination between education and health, and a lack of meaningful participation by children, young people, families in decisions that affect them. While the revised SEN regulations and code of practice represent an opportunity for meaningful reform, progress has been slow. Indeed, I can report no dramatic improvements since the publication of Too Little Too Late 6 years ago. The SEN reform agenda and delivery plan is welcome, but implementation must be underpinned by adequate funding, robust government and clear accountability. Without this, the risk remains that transformation will be a change in name only, and children will continue to experience unmet need, lost educational opportunity, and in some cases breaches of their rights. The committee's scrutiny role is therefore vital. We need to assure that the framework will deliver early identification, timely intervention and joined up support, and that the Education Authority and the Department for Education are held to account for meeting their statutory duties. We also need transparency on how local impact teams will operate, how waiting times will be reduced, and how equality of opportunity will be safeguarded for every child. This is more than about process, this is about child's rights. The decisions taken now will shape the education experiences of thousands of children with SEN in years to come, and NICCY stands ready to support the committee in ensuring that this reform is not only well-intentioned but effective, rights compliant and resourced to succeed. In terms of my analysis, I want to just start by welcoming the principle of transformation, but I really think it's pertinent to ask, when will we actually see these improvements? How do we know that outcomes for children and young people are improving, and in what way? What are the timeframes that we're working to? What are the targets, and how will these be measured and by whom? I'm acutely aware that too many children are being failed, and the numbers of parents who are deregistering their children from education is increasing year on year. And often this is because children with SEN aren't getting what they need from the education system. They're being forced into these situations, and that's a breach of the child's fundamental right to education. From our annual casework and legal review 24-25, and in terms of special educational needs, the statistics show an increase in complaints to our office on this matter from 36% to 47%. So that's an 11% increase in 1 year, and Joanne will be able to talk more about that during our Q&A. I've seen many cases where school is unable to meet the needs of the child, or where the Education Authority is not communicating with parents effectively. I've seen examples of children with literacy support needs, and where changes in LITs have resulted in a child experiencing extreme anxiety and leaving school as a result, or a parent whose child is counted as being in contingency arrangements but has no school, no start date, no communication from EA, and but has no school start date, no communication from EA, and even no physical classroom or appointed teacher, yet they're being counted as being placed. So you'll all, I'm sure, have your own examples of how the rhetoric doesn't always match the lived experiences of children and their families. I recognise the complexity of the task facing the Education Authority and the commitment of many staff. However, there remains a gap between the stated ambition and the lived experiences of children and families. I have concerns around the processes around planning, communication with children and young people and their parents, and of joined working between different government departments. In addition, there is a lack of up-to-date, timely and accurate data which hampers the ability to monitor and review effectiveness of laws and services affecting children and young people. Greater transparency and detail on how health and education are working together, including data sharing and consideration of workforce planning to improve early intervention and support for children with SEND would be welcome, and I would encourage that the committee consider this as part of their inquiry. Some key observations in terms of the SEND landscape that I have just before we do pause for question and answers. So firstly, trends we cannot ignore. So the SEND register has remained broadly stable, yet the number of statutory statements has doubled over the past decade. This reflects unmet need at early stages, which escalates into more complex cases requiring costly, intensive interventions. Increasing use of reduced timetables and prolonged absences for children with additional needs raises serious equality and discrimination concerns. The number of those registering has increased steadily every year, so from 287 in 2017-18 to 1,220 in 24-25, and that's an increase of 335% over 7 years. So we don't have an accurate picture as to why this is happening because of the way the data is collected, but through our casework and our fieldwork, through our school absence research, we know that unmet SEND needs is a factor. The second thing, systemic issues persist despite transformation. So Northern Ireland's SEND legal framework is robust, but operational systems remain slow and bureaucratic. And while the Education Authority and Department of Education have invested significantly, children continue to experience delays, barriers and loss of education. Thirdly, local impact teams. In terms of opportunities and risks, while LITs offer clear potential, for example, a single referral route, improved governance, better data oversight and more joined up working, many questions do remain. Especially if those teams are not properly resourced, and we risk repeating previous patterns of rationing support or not providing it when needed. So in that context, I'm particularly worried about staffing and funding uncertainty, as well as where these pressures are displaced elsewhere within the system, for example, the SENCOs, classroom assistants or teachers. And we have clear examples of how literacy support is one example of how that is happening currently. So again, I'd be interested if the committee could investigate that issue further through its deliberations. Fourthly, escalating need and rising statements. So there are around 70,000 pupils on the SEND register, and that figure has remained stable. However, the proportion of statements have risen from 22% in 2014-15 to 42% in 24-25. This is not evidence of over-identification, but of system failure to intervene early. Fifthly, children's services cooperation. SEND support depends on effective cooperation between education, health and social care, including SLT, OT, CAMS, diagnostics and social services. It would be useful if the committee would seek more clarification on how health and education cooperate, including mechanisms for practitioners to make referrals on identification of need and at what age this happens. And I'll talk more about that later, because we are really, we feel strongly that early intervention is key to this. Sixthly, transparency and accountability. There is an urgent need for comprehensive published data, including on LITs, outcomes, waiting times, unmet need and equality impacts. Transformation must remain subject to effective scrutiny to ensure alignment with statutory duties and children's rights. And then just some points before I do pause on what we feel needs to change. So firstly, investment in pupil support services. So services must be designed and funded to deliver timely, effective support, not crisis management. So we need to focus more on pre-crisis intervention and support. Secondly, move beyond short-term solutions. So for example, specialist provision in mainstream schools can be valuable, but they're not a substitute for systemic reform. The system must move away from crisis management towards sustainable planning. Thirdly, expedite training and support for classroom assistants and teachers. And I know you'll have heard this throughout your inquiry. And I would just reinforce that message, including trauma-informed practice, training on ACEs and behavioural support. Fourthly, improve communication engagement with parents and carers and with schools. And in fact, the Too Little Too Late report in the year 2020, proposed new methods of communication and transparency with regards to the same process. Fifthly, embed transparency and accountability. So we need published, accurate, timely data to establish clear governance and ensure robust scrutiny against legal duties. And again, this links back to recommendations made as the part of the Too Little Too Late report. We need to operationalise joined up working. So partnership between education, health and social care must move from aspiration to practice, particularly for children with complex needs. Number 7, prioritise early intervention and identification of need, ensuring placement meets the child's needs. So we need to reduce bureaucracy to empower schools to act early. Planning for school placement should begin at the age of 2, not 4 or 5. And diagnostic uncertainty can't be used to justify delay. So early joint planning between health and education is essential. Number 8, develop a clear inclusion policy. So inclusion must be defined clearly and embedded into departmental policy and curriculum to guarantee equality and rights. And I can cross-reference that recommendation to the Committee for the Rights of Disabled People. And I can give you the exact clauses in one of their concluding observation sessions. Resolve data sharing barriers, so persistent failures in sharing health and education data must be addressed at permanent secretary and ministerial level. And finally, secure sustainable funding. So SEND transformation requires long-term, strategic, child-centred investment, not short-term fixes. So, chairs, members, children and families have waited a long time for meaningful SEND reform. What they need now is not further aspiration, but action, measurable, transparent and timely. And I thank the committee for its scrutiny of these issues and look forward to your questions.
Thank you. And I think, as with all of these issues, when we look at SEN, when we're looking at that overarching picture, it really is genuinely often very hard to know where to begin, because it is such a big complex system, and everything is interconnected. I wanted to start with the specialist provisions in mainstream issue and the SPIMS. And I think, your submission to the inquiry, I think, is clear in this, but I just wanted really to pin this down. From your perspective, do you see a place for that model of placement for children and meeting a child's needs, or do you have fundamental concerns about that as an approach?
Yeah, I definitely see a place for it. I think, to be fair, the department and the Education Authority have reacted to a lack of physical spaces, and we have carried out our own piece of work around SPIMS, which I can share with the committee and which we have given to the Education Authority for the responses which we await. I've visited lots of SPIMS, and you can see where it works really well, when managed well, when planned well. You can see an inclusive environment. But I wouldn't say that it's a means to an end. I think schools and school leaders will often be apprehensive about taking on a new unit, and a lot of the time the feedback we get is because of lack of support, perceived or otherwise. And I think the planning, and Joanne, you might want to come in here, but often anecdotally we hear that there's a lack of communication in terms of planning for children who will be placed in these SPIMs, and therefore it makes life a lot more difficult for the teachers and the staff. Did you want to come in on that point?
Well, I think certainly there is an issue in terms of planning, and parents being advised that they have placements, and I'm sure you've heard this yourself in your constituencies, and they're maybe waiting 2 or 3 months for sort of inappropriate communications or lack of communication, and then to hear that a teacher won't be recruited until maybe November, and they're hearing this in summertime. So I think there is an issue around that. There certainly is a place, and we've had some positive feedback about the need not to travel and very successful SPIMS placements. But we also have had concerns raised where SPIMS are reporting concerns about the provision, so maybe health and safety concerns or concerns about the need for additional support, and they're not able to access that in a timely way. It's creating significant issues for the children and for the staff, and so there needs to be an ability to be flexible and to respond appropriately and resource those provisions appropriately to ensure they're successful for children.
Like I imagine other members will pick up the issue of placements in more detail, as it's been a recurring theme, so I'll not go into that in too much detail. But you did reference, I think, in your submission to the inquiry, this issue of where provision is located being important, and that because placements are often unplanned and they're reactionary, the children often end up having to travel quite considerable distances to go to a specialist provision, when there may be schools all around them who have capacity but haven't actually facilitated one. So I suppose there's 2 questions arising from that. Do you think that we need to give serious attention as to whether or not schools should be permitted to decline taking a provision? So if a need is identified, should schools be able to say that we don't want one? Because that is currently what is happening, for, as you highlight, a range of reasons, but I want to get your view on that. And also in terms of what is in the best interest of the child, for your position on, should the goal be that children with additional needs are educated in their own community rather than bussed miles away simply because there isn't a provision anywhere near?
Yeah, I think, and I'll just start by saying I think part of the solution here is a policy, a clear policy on what inclusion is and what it looks like, because I think if we had the policy driver, we could build a better system. I was, in preparation for this meeting, I was looking back to Every School a Good School, which I think was 2009, if that memory serves me correctly. And whilst there were criticisms of it, I think the principle that every school should be a good school, an inclusive school, and Every School a Good School did talk to inclusion. But I do think sometimes there's an overemphasis on putting SPIMs in place as being the solution, but I do also agree that children should have access to an inclusive education system in their community, and we've seen how children are spending a long time travelling, and we've seen headlines around the financial impact on that. I suppose I'm more worried about the wellbeing impact on a child, and how can a child be ready for school in those circumstances. So I would very much advocate for, where possible, local schools as inclusive schools, but also recognise that sometimes a SPIM won't be able to meet the needs of a child, which is why we need a broader, special.
It's the role of special schools, and to have that all clarified in policy. No, I mean, I think we do need to keep coming back to the rights of the child and the well-being of the child being the most important aspect of this. I raised that issue about travel really because it was fresh in my mind. I have a local issue at the minute in my own constituency of someone who's had actually a really successful placement in a preschool SPIM, really successful, but it's right in the heart of the town they live in, and they're already being told your options for P1 are likely to be a 45-minute hour trip and she's already looking at her child and saying, I know they can't cope with that, and I mean, my gut reaction is that doesn't feel appropriate, but I know that so many parents often have to take those options because there simply isn't another appropriate provision nearby. So I think that planned aspect of the placements is important. I've just one final question, and I wanted to raise it because I know that it's an issue that you've paid attention to in your role, Chris, and we haven't heard a huge amount of evidence on it through this inquiry, and it is just around that. We've talked about the early placement, but up the system, moving on out of education and transitions. I would really just like to get your assessment of for children and young people with additional needs. How effective do you feel the transition planning process out of school into the next step, be that further education, be that into work training initiatives, or whatever the next step might be?
Yeah, I would argue that transition planning is an issue throughout the life of the child. We can see, if you look at SPIMS for an example, I visited SPIMS where it might be a P1-2 class and parents don't know what's going to happen in P3, 4, 5. If you look at the transition between primary school and secondary school, there can be difficulty there, but I do feel really strongly about the cliff edge that we currently have at 19. And I know there's great work going on in that space. Caleb's cause we'll all know about. And I would argue we need legislative change, and that would require economy and education and others working together. But at the minute we are leading children to a cliff edge. And I'm going to quote a parent who asked me, who told me that her aspiration was that, she said, I wouldn't change the world for Corey, but we need to change, or I wouldn't change Corey for the world, but we need to change the world for Corey, right? And that principle needs to be applied here, that the way our systems, our education system and otherwise are set up, they're not planned for children with special educational needs.
Well, look, you answered my next question, was do we need legislative change in that space? And you've answered that, and I think we are reaching the point we're starting to think about what are the recommendations that will arise from this inquiry, and I certainly would be keen to see something around the legislative change that's needed at that stage being introduced. I think I'd mentioned at the start of the meeting the informal briefing we had with a young man, Kingston, who was explaining his experience of the system, and he was really clear that the transition planning was simply not effective, and he was effectively really offered no options.
Yeah.
That can't be acceptable. But I think other members will be keen to come in, so I'll draw a line there. I'll bring the Deputy Chair in, and then if other members could indicate through the clerk, we've got a couple already.
Thanks to both of you for coming in. And you've outlined, Chris, that the majority of cases dealt with by your legal investigations department have been around education.
Yeah.
And the greatest proportion of those cases are to do with SEN.
Yeah.
Now, it's almost a year since the Minister launched this SEN reform plan and delivery plan. And can you tell us, have you noticed any substantive change in the past year since this new plan was launched?
Yeah, no, Joanne, do you want to lead?
Yeah, happy to do that. So every year we produce an annual report. So the statistics that Chris quoted were our 24-25 figures. So just for coming here today, I've had a look at the recent trends and tried to analyse those recent trends. And really it's the same trends coming through again. So still over half education, and still over half of the education cases or special educational needs cases around assessments, declined assessments that are then conceded at the door of the court, late placements, lack of communication, lack of identification of need at school level, and then exacerbated need later on down the line resulting in school refusal or anxiety. So unfortunately, although it's not the full picture because I don't have the full year, I've just looked at it quarter on quarter at the minute, and at the end of April we will have the full statistics, so I'm not sure where you'll be in terms of your inquiry, but I could send them through if it's of help. But we haven't, and I appreciate it's relatively early days, but we haven't seen a change in the trend at the moment.
Yeah, and I would just add that I suppose even when I look back at the Too Little Too Late report, 6 years ago, I really struggle to point to where improvements have been made. I do, and just speaking really candidly, I do get frustrated when I speak directly to parents and children because their lived experience doesn't match what we're being told in terms of the change. And that's not to say, as I said in my input, there are really good people working hard to try and turn this thing around. But a problem that I have in terms of giving a really adequate analysis, there is an issue with adequate, timely data and updates, you know, in terms of me being able to give that robust analysis of, is the system changing? At the minute, when I speak with people leading that change, I'm hearing good things, I'm hearing progress, but I'm not seeing it when I'm in schools or when I'm talking to parents. And I think that's something that we need to address, you know, that why bit. And that's why I'm leaning so heavily into the need for timely, accurate, up-to-date data so that we can analyse that efficiently.
Okay. And Joanne, you mentioned the appeals, the send appeals, and at this committee on the 1st of October, and someone else gave evidence at the committee and told us that 95% of the appeals are conceded by the Education Authority. But the Chief Executive, Richard Pengelly, on the 1st of October last year told us that the vast majority of appeals are conceded because information that could have been introduced before the appeal process started wasn't. In effect, he was blaming parents, medics, schools and so on rather than the EA. Is that your own experience?
I have real difficulty with that defence of why cases are conceded. When parents submit an application for a statutory assessment or schools submit an application for a statutory assessment, they are normally, they've been through processes, they have children that are really experiencing significant needs and they need help as soon as they can get it, and they are given everything that they have. And the onus shouldn't be on them, the barrier shouldn't be in front of them to go scrambling for information that's in the system, either with health professionals, with the school. Of course they will, it's very important that they and the child have their opportunity to put their information forward. But in sort of response to that, parents don't know that they're going to be refused statutory assessment, and until they get the information as to how they're being refused or why they're being refused, they can't rebut it, essentially, you know. So I don't accept that position. I understand that is the position that's put forward, but I think the barrier should be removed. There should be almost an inquisitorial element when somebody's asking for a statutory assessment. Why is this being asked for? What information is in the system, to make sure that we have everything that we need to be able to assess this, to find out what the needs are, to identify them, not to put up a barrier and say, well, how can we not provide support? Or arguably there's an argument that what else needs to be provided, but I think you need to remove obstacles and look for the information, look for why a parent is asking for this for the child, and it will be to meet the child's best interest and their needs.
I mean, there is a suspicion there that all these obstacles are set up in the hope that, you know, parents who don't know their way around the system, don't know how to navigate the system, will eventually just say, no, I don't know how to progress this, and just withdraw their appeal.
Yeah, parents are extremely concerned and exhausted when they're going through this process. You'll all know it, because you'll have had the complaints through to your constituency, and sometimes to them it certainly feels like that. When they're coming to us, it feels like there's another obstacle in the way and that they're exhausted, trying to fight at every avenue, and we need to move away the obstacles so that it's not a fight. In fact, we're looking for the information to make sure the needs are met, to identify the needs.
And I suppose all these issues are related that I'm talking about, and the other one is the lack of communication between the Education Authority and parents. And, you know, we've been reassured on numerous occasions by the EA they're you know, setting up more phone lines, they're putting more people on the casework and so on and so forth. However, we're still getting numerous complaints from parents about, for example, not being able to contact, despite phoning dozens and dozens of times, about, particularly when it comes to summer and placements, and their children haven't received placements and they're trying to get in touch with the EA, and it, you know, it's just a nightmare for them. Are you seeing any improvement at all in terms of communication between the EA and families in your own casework?
Just ask for a brief response.
Communication is just a continuing theme. We haven't tracked trends as such in terms of the last years around specific communications, but it is a continuing theme, both in terms of when we are trying to contact the EA to get a response, and maybe Chris will be able to talk to that a wee bit more in terms of general information. But when we're pursuing individual cases, we ourselves are having difficulties and having to challenge that.
That's amazing. Even yourselves can't get communication. But thanks for that, Anna. Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Deputy Chair. Kathy, you'd indicated.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks very much for your presentation. Really useful. Chris, I just want to pick up on something that you said, and it's something that we've heard time and again, and it's that the theory versus the reality on the ground. And I would say every single witness that we've had in has said that exact same thing in a different form of words. And we've heard from teachers, principals, classroom assistants, SENCOs, parents, everybody saying the same thing. But something specific registered there with me was around literacy support that you mentioned. Now, we've heard evidence from SENCOs to say how difficult it is to get literacy support. We've heard from staff within the EA themselves who are trying their absolute best to get the right support to the children, but the system's not allowing them to do so, this new system. But yet when EA come in and they speak to us, it's wonderful. More children are getting support and getting better support. Just because you mentioned it, can I get your view on that? Have you heard that, or what have you? Yeah,
and Joanne might want to come in this again, because it is literacy support is something that we have sought clarity on. But I guess, like you and your constituents, a lot of my time is spent, and Joanne's time and our team's time, speaking with parents who are in absolute crisis. And there was an example I gave in my opening statement there about a child who deregistered because their literacy support wasn't getting picked up through the new lit, and it created so much anxiety for the child that they removed themselves from education altogether. I've seen it in my own community. I've seen literacy support getting pulled where children have really benefited, and in fact the people providing that support have reported equally their anxiety about pulling out. Joanne, you might want to talk more about the specifics of the cases that, or what we required, the information we asked for from you.
So we were contacted about this, and I suppose what was concerning was people working in that field that were finding it difficult to understand, work through, and didn't feel that they would be meeting the needs of the child that they were working with. So we wrote about a few things around, there was concern that there would only be 12 sessions and they'd have to pull out, that the sessions are an hour long and it's too long for some, that 3 sessions were needed to establish a working dynamic, lack of clarity on how to make a referral, who is eligible. Then there was obviously a pause that was a concern, confusion about the referrals process, staff not to use particular terms that would be associated with literacy support, and the way scoring was done. So that's just a few of the issues. But we did receive a really comprehensive response from the EA that addressed some of those concerns. I think what was concerning to me is the complexity of the information we received, the amount of time that would be needed to work through that, to understand, to be clear about the referrals process, and then to be satisfied that that was going to meet the needs of the child. So I think there is an element of, there is, as Chris said, a lot of work, good work going on, but making sure that that's clear, that people have the time to engage with that, to report concerns, to monitor how that's working, to monitor what the issues are with it. All of those things are concerning. Yeah,
could I just to add to that, I think we need to recognise that we need to give LITs time to breathe and to develop, but I am concerned about resourcing and how literacy support, for example, is getting pulled. You're robbing Peter to pay Paul. And I do want to just note that Collier, the Gael Scully Acta, made a representation to me with regards to literacy support and diagnostics in Irish medium education. as something additional, within all these challenges that we're facing. There's a added barrier there within IME at the minute, which should be looked at as part of this.
No, I couldn't agree more. But you mentioned there about right resources and things like that, and even the data. Like, we were assured that more children were getting this support. We were promised the data on that, and as far as I'm aware, we still haven't received that as a committee. And the resources, like, we're speaking to literacy teachers who would have been out 5 days a week providing one-to-one support, who are now only doing it 2 days a week, if even. So there's 3 days worth of resources that are there that don't seem to be being used. But because there's a couple of other things I want to cover. And
time's very short, Cathy. If you've most of your time on that one, so just be a quick final point
around anxiety and the anxiety that comes out of that, and the case that you're citing there. And I know we've spoke before around the emotional based school non-attendance, and very often it's children with SEND that are impacted most by this. And you mentioned again, Chris, around investment in pupil support services, yet we have a minister who last year made the decision not to extend counselling services to schools. Can I get your view on that and the impact that that's going to have, especially in those non-attendance children?
Yeah, so that's as brief a comment as you can, and then we'll have to move on to the next
really
one.
Briefly, generally children's support needs are not getting met. That goes across a lot of areas that I look at. Early intervention is key, so I would prefer that the Education Authority is working more closely with health, talking about diagnostics and early signs at age 2 or as early as possible. I think that's part of it. Anxiety-based school avoidance, we're doing a big bit of research into it. But I would point you to the figure, the 335% increase in deregistrations in schools in the last 7 years. And whilst we know through our fieldwork and our research that SEND is an issue, the way the data is collected doesn't give a clear picture. So we need to be asking more about why deregistrations are happening. And I would hypothesise that there's definitely an element of anxiety-based school avoidance which is interlinked to all of this.
I'll have to just close out, but members may want to pick that up, as I know that the attendance and the special educational needs, there's obviously a lot of connections there. John had indicated next.
Thank you, Chair. I think that was really useful. Let me just 3 questions, please, if we have time. I would like to get through. One is about so I'm struggling with my tech today. One is about the budgets of schools. And it seems to me whenever I speak to headmasters, there's a frustration when people say, can we do this and do that? Because 82%, I think it is, of their budget is actually taken up with salaries. And then when you add other non-discretionary spend, like buildings and utilities, there's actually very little left to do anything with. Do you think we actually just need to be honest that schools have very little wriggle room to do anything other than the very basics because of the way they're resourced?
John, what I would say to that, from speaking with school leaders directly, I think there is something in giving school leaders more flexibility to use the budget that they have more efficiently. And you'll probably hear lots of stories about, let's say, repairs to a school and how the procurement system is resulting in paying over the odds to fix for basic maintenance. I think that's one thing. School leaders have also spoke to me about having the ability to use that budget, for example, with classroom assistants, to be able to employ specialists, specialists in the classroom, for example, speech and language, or for example, specifically skilled teaching staff. But whilst I'm not an expert on the school budget system, the feedback that I'm hearing is more about flexibility and empowerment for school leaders. I do want to just note my concern with regards to the directive not to, for example, hiring substitute teachers and things like that. I think that's a really concerning safeguarding issue, and it does need to be looked at. And I know it's not directly in relation to your question, but what I'm trying to say is I think we need to do some more work on using the money that we do have in a more flexible way, and school leaders will have their own ideas about that.
Okay, yes. I mean, I would agree with you on that. And the procurement issue is a one that I come across in every school. And typically, I'm finding that it's probably 300% more expensive to use the procured service than it is for, say, maintenance or painting, than it is to use the local handyman, so or woman. So just something to park for a second. Look, in your evidence, you mentioned poor planning and communication when it comes to saying. Would you agree that replacement of SIMS, the imminent replacement of SIMS, provides the opportunity to have a portal which is regularly updated and accessible to all relevant statutory bodies?
Yeah, so this in relation to the portal that's being developed.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's something actually that we're wanting to monitor, and Joanne and her team have been liaising with the Education Authority and getting a better understanding of how that works. I think we do need a better system of collating and sharing information, and that needs to go beyond just education. You know, I suppose one of my questions is, well, how will Encompass talk to this new system, etc. But Joanne, you might want to come in there in terms of the new software.
Yeah, no, I think it certainly represents an opportunity to change, to have parents to be updated when information's received. And it'll be a matter of monitoring it, making sure that over time it's working effectively, it's updated effectively, and the parents are getting the information they need from it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a final one, and it concerns me about reduced timetables. There seems to be a significant issue of the practice of reduced timetables for pupils perceived to be challenging or needing additional needs. What are your thoughts on this? And do we need to actually legislate for a more consistent approach to this? Because I'm just worried about compounding disadvantage by these reduced timetables.
Yeah, there's definitely an equity and equality issue here with regards to reduced timetables. My analysis of this issue is that often the placement does not meet the child's needs. And I think there is definitely more work to be done. It's not acceptable that a child is on a maybe 2 hours a day school placement and that's counted as that's the box checked. I do think that needs further investigation and maybe something the committee could look further into. But I do think a lot of the time you have an issue with regards to placement not meeting need and back to workforce. You know, workforce needs supported and trained to deal with issues that they're being confronted with, and a lot of the time these issues manifest themselves in behavioural problems that we're seeing a lot of in school, in schools and other settings. But
yeah, and just if I could come in there and just say reduced timetables in general are unlawful, and children aren't being able to access the full education that they're entitled to. So I think we need to be careful in terms of legislation, because at the moment they should not be happening. And if there is an issue in terms of, and as Chris has said, it generally is as a result of a placement or a need not being met or provision that's not meeting a child's needs, that they're an interim and an emergency measure or risk assessed measure. But they should be very short term, there should be very fast response to them. And we're quite aware that they're not always recorded, and that's something that needs to be pursued so that there's accurate data about who is not receiving an effective education.
Very good. Thank you. That completes my questions, and thanks for your briefing.
Thank you, John. So, Danny, you'd indicated next.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you. I suppose I'm well on record as saying children with special educational needs have been failed and continue to be failed. And there's 3 key areas I would like to concentrate on with you, and that would be, it's been touched on already, is placements. And my view would be that we need a policy change, like if we could explore, and I've said this to the EA and to the Minister, a send first approach, because if we were placing children with special needs, additional needs first, then I think things would fall into place a lot quicker. And the reason why I say that is, even if you look at June of last year, we had hundreds of children that weren't placed. We had our education minister in Florida. We had the chief executive of the EA sitting in Wimbledon. If that was hundreds and hundreds of children of mainstream in that predicament, I guarantee you they would not have been there. That's my personal view on that. The other 2 sides of it is the decisions that are continuing to be made. And if we look at the EOTA centres and referrals getting that going there, my experience with the young people that go there or either have been not supported at an earlier stage and would have additional needs, this is going to be an unfair change to them, and they're going to end up falling completely out of the system and costing the system even more in the long run. And the last part of it would be, and Chris, just with your experience as a youth worker as well, I think there's a huge gap when it comes to children with additional needs and then outside of school youth work, whether that's in the community and voluntary sector or in the statutory sector, where there's just not enough opportunities, or there's no specifications, or not enough specifications being written by the Education Authority and the department. So those 3 key areas, and just what sort of changes you think could be made in a policy, that directive?
Yeah, we'll go take them one at a time. The saying first approach, actually, we chatted about this on the way up in the car. So currently the feedback that I'm getting is that placement planning is now beginning in November, which is earlier than it had done in previous years, but I don't accept that that's enough. That's not an awful lot of time before summer break comes and put Christmas in the middle. And a lot of the time, as I said earlier, we're dealing with parents who are in crisis, waiting for their placement. I was going to invite you to come in on that process of placement.
Yeah, so we discussed, the process in relation to the children, young people without special educational needs, and how they are notified first, and how there's an annual review process. So there is scope there to make sure that needs are known, and that children's needs are known and then are factored into placements in the years going ahead. But often the children we're dealing with are children that require routine, consistency, preparation, much more than children that don't have special educational needs. And there's a strong argument there for them to be placed first. So it is something that we have talked about a lot, and it's a concern that essentially the education, there is a responsibility for all children to have an education, and there needs to be provision for all children, including children with special educational needs, to have a placement in September of when they're going to school. If it was the case that our mainstream children, or there wasn't enough capacity in our mainstream schools, there would be serious uproar. And I think essentially I'm, saying back to you, Danny, what you have said, but there is an obligation there. There's an obligation in legislation to have that provision for all children, including children with special educational needs. So I don't think it's a year-on-year approach. It's a system-wide approach that's needed to make sure that capacity is there. And I think one of the things I would say around that is understanding capacity, gathering the data, and Chris has mentioned it already, but I think there is concern when I look at casework and I see children at 4.5 that have had a couple of months in school, and it's at that stage it's identified that this placement isn't meeting their needs, they're melting down, they're on reduced timetables, and there's clear evidence from health maybe a year or two before that this is quite likely. In fact, in some of my casework I can see on record it is quite likely, in a letter from a health professional maybe a year or two before, it's quite likely this child will need additional support in school, and they haven't been referred into the statement and process. So I think there is a need for coordination across the different departments. And also I do question, and I would ask the inquiry to consider how health can practically refer to the Education Authority or into the education system. I know that there's legislation there that places an obligation on them to do that, but I do wonder practically for health practitioners, GPs, health visitors that are seeing these children in the early stages of their life and throughout, what is their route? Because sometimes we're getting feedback from the health practitioners, the allied health professionals, that they're not always encouraged to make those referrals.
And I do think that if there was a change that could be made, change in that early diagnosis, and I do feel that is lost sometimes when I talk to EA and DE, that you can spot many special educational needs at a very early stage. Social work practitioners, childcare workers will testify to that, but for some reason health and education aren't talking to each other. As I say, I think 2 years old is a pretty reasonable place to start planning for that. So I think that's a point we really wanted to strike home on today. Just on your other 2 questions, so
asked briefly here as we're up against it with time.
I'll go youth work first. I do think there's an issue. I've written to EA quite a while ago actually about does their scope allow, or do their specs allow for special educational needs through youth work, and at that time there wasn't provision, and I'm meeting with EA and DA on youth work funding and policy in the next few weeks, and I'll bring it up again. I do think there's a disparity between what voluntary sector organisations can avail of compared to statutory education authority youth work settings, because in some of the statutory settings you can see physical infrastructure to support children with special educational needs. On EOTIS, again, I think there's an issue there that needs to be looked at in terms of funding that EOTIS are in receipt of, and in particular the disparity between voluntary sector provision and statutory sector. And there's probably an issue there that will come to you through your constituency work anyway, because I know that's a concern. But just in terms of your specific question on referrals, could you just clarify?
This would have to be very brief,
So
as
there's
we are at the
going to
time.
be referrals stopping to some of the EOTIS centres coming up in June. So that's a recent decision by the EA to save money. But my point back is that if you're prioritising children with special or additional needs, and a lot of the kids I know who go in that are available late in diagnosis, fell out of the school, got back in that way, this is again disadvantaging the most disadvantaged.
Apologies, I understand now. Yeah, and that is an alarm bell, because, and it goes against what EA are saying about SEND. Actually, you know, you're displacing those children. You know, where will they be placed if it's not within EOTIS?
And I have to say, like, we can't allow resources to drive this. It has to be child-centred. It has to be identification of needs. It has to be what's needed. Yeah.
That's great. I apologise, I don't like cutting across witnesses. We are up against it with time. David, you had asked to come in to respond to something Danny said. I just want to be clear here. This is a response to what's been said, because you have your own question, and if we go over time, I will reflect that on how much time you get in your own question.
That's fair enough. Chair, I think I didn't want to interrupt while Danny was asking his questions, because I think they were worthwhile questions and well worth hearing the answers to. But I do think prefacing them with a jibe at Richard Pengelly in terms of Wimbledon was inappropriate. I think whether chief executives, permanent secretaries, MLAs, we all go to sporting events, holidays, concerts during our time off. And I think people are entitled to do that outside of their professional role without it being brought as a jibe at this committee. And I just think it's relevant. I wasn't trying to lock horns with Danny, but I think it's
just noted. Danny, response, and then we'll leave it.
It's not a jibe. If you my point is, if that was hundreds of mainstream children not placed a week before we're going into recess, before schools closed, they had no place, by the way, when everyone was placed back in April. They wouldn't take those. They wouldn't take those trips. Not a chance. That's my view on it.
Two different views on that matter, so that's noted for the record. Michelle, you are next.
Thanks. Thank you, folks, as usual, for your contribution. I got an update last week on placements for 2026, and there's a need for 950 additional places, and the update was that they have initiated progress on 350 of these places. So we're already looking at another crisis in placements sitting here in January. You've already referenced in your evidence the need for a more strategic approach to this. Could you expand on that? And do you see any evidence right now that that shift is happening?
Yeah, I think, and I don't want to oversimplify this, but the key here is early intervention and planning at an early stage. And we've been consistent in feeding this back to the Education Authority and others. It shouldn't be a surprise. It shouldn't be, where are we, January? It shouldn't be a surprise in January 2026 that there's 950 children who need placements in September 2026. Parents, professionals working in those various sectors will know this. So it does feel, and forgive me for being quite blunt about this, but it does feel that we're in this everlasting game of whack-a-mole, and you're moving parts of you're moving pawns about a chessboard, or you're building Lego blocks, whatever metaphor you want to use. And whilst, as I say, yes, we do need to focus on the physical bricks and mortar and build more spaces for children, we need to get out of this cycle. You know, so the planning needs to happen early. And I know you've been consistent in saying this pre my time in NICCY. So this is the same thing. you know, and I don't know, Joanne, if you want to add to that.
It's probably back to the point I was making earlier in relation to the data. Get it as early as possible, identify what your needs are, what the needs of children are going to be in school, and plan for that, and plan from that from as early as you possibly can. And we know that all children's special educational needs will not become apparent until they're at school, but there is a large proportion that can be planned for, data that can be tracked to identify what specialisms are going to be needed in terms of professional services. But I think early identification and then strategically planning in response to that, and monitoring it, and monitoring the right data so that you're able to adapt and change your approach as needed.
So, and can I just also add there, I know the EA are working on this. I'm not suggesting that anybody's sitting on their hands and not trying to address that need for 2026. We do have an issue though that, and we were told this briefing from the EA when they were in before, that they're almost, I guess, tapped out in terms of the schools that are coming forward really to help with this. The Minister did suggest last year that he has the opportunity, he has the power to direct schools. What do you think about the Minister potentially using that power? I know it's a difficult one.
Yeah, I think we need to rely more heavily on the expertise of the people working day to day with these children and in their communities. School leaders will be able to inform this better than most. I do think it's regrettable that sometimes the narrative seems to be that schools are bad for not taking SPIMS, that teachers are bad for not doing this. I mean, we've got educational workforce working in very difficult circumstances. In terms of legislating for, my aspiration that every school is an inclusive school. I think that every school should be able to cater for a child's needs, but bearing in mind that sometimes a child's needs might be so severe that they need alternative provision. That's why I do feel strongly in a policy driver behind this, because if we don't, I mean, we're going to keep going in this cycle. I can't really give you a clear answer at the moment on whether schools should be enforced, but it is something we'll take away.
I think it's difficult in the current system when you are hearing, and school leaders are hearing concerning reports from SPIMS that aren't always getting the support, the resources that they need, and they're in a difficult position. And so to legislate in that position, you know, I think Chris is right. You need to listen to the leaders and the professionals that are on the ground.
And you're quite right. I think the support issue is something that I didn't say. You know, we do often hear that there's a fear of lack of support when a SPIM does get set up, and I think that is a barrier.
Yet the messaging is that you will get all the support that you need, and sometimes that is the case. But again, you'll be aware as well of just circumstances where schools have not felt they've got the support that they needed. So that's okay for me. Thank you both.
Thank you, Michelle. And Cara, you were next there.
Thank you so much, Chair, and thank you to the panel for being here. We always learn something new when you come to committee, so thank you. You had touched on there the importance of addressing emotional-based school avoidance, massive issue, and I know you're both very passionate about it. I'm just wondering if you can detail a bit more information around this and what you've done so far, as I know it's something you're really keen to see some work on.
Yeah, thank you, Cara. We're conducting a bit of research on this as we speak. So my colleague, Dr. Arlene Robertson, would have been here with us today, but she is up to her eyes looking at this piece of work. We're hoping to publish that, I think, later in this calendar year. And where we're at the minute is that Arlene is carrying out her field work, so interviews with stakeholders, parents, people that work with children and young people, and we're also going to be engaging directly with children and young people themselves. So we are acutely aware that often data gets circulated, and we really want to get behind that data, and we want to understand why children are experiencing this. So perhaps it'll be something when we do have more information on the findings of that research we can come back and present on. And I'm sure Arlene as well would be very happy to speak with you directly, because I know it's something that you've worked on in the past also.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you so much. Just on that note, then, one of the main things when I'm speaking with young people, there tends to be a group of children who suspect themselves to have either ADHD, autism, or both, but they've yet to get an assessment. And they feel like they fall between the gaps. They don't get the right support in the classroom. They might not want to attend school as a result. And I was just wondering, would you have engagement with those schools, with those pupils, pardon me, and their parents around this issue, those children who have yet to really get an assessment and a diagnosis, and the kind of troubles that they experience in the classroom setting?
Yeah, thanks very much for the question, Cara. And that's something that we would encounter quite a lot. And there sometimes is a misunderstanding that you require a diagnosis to access support in school, because your special educational needs should be, and the provision should be based on how you present. And of course, the diagnosis will at times unlock essentially health support. But how you're presenting in school should allow school provision to be provided. But yeah, we would certainly advise along those lines. And a lot of children are impacted by long waiting lists that are preventing them access the health support that they need, because of course the support needs to work together. The school support and education support need to work together for the best outcome for a child and young person.
Yeah,
Well, that's really helpful.
actually the waiting list was an issue. I took it out of my briefing, but I'm glad it's come up, because those waiting times in health definitely have an impact, and it also relates into misdiagnosis. You know, so sometimes the diagnosis might be wrong because you know the ADHD or autism diagnosis hasn't been acquired yet. You know.
And for many without that diagnosis, they just feel lost and they feel like they can't focus. And I know it can be really, they don't feel empowered in a learning environment. So it's really good that that's on the agenda and is being explored. Other members have asked my questions about reduced timetables, which is really, really concerning. Just lastly, one of the things I'm really keen to see is the Department of Education and the Minister, when he's bringing forward changes, like what we've seen with Transform Ed, is to ensure that we're trauma informed when we're talking about our children and their lived experience. And I had raised my concern about who falls under defined and the definition of educational disadvantage. I suppose on a scale from 1 to 10, if possible, could you maybe rate how you think the department and this minister is taking a trauma-informed approach? Because I do think there is a gap there. When I see children and young people that I speak with, they don't feel understood, and they have these complexities in the home that maybe their teachers don't know or don't understand. And when we see words like educational disadvantage, I just see that those children aren't being heard and aren't being listened to.
Yeah, it's a really good question, Cara. I don't feel it'd be qualified at this point to give the minister a rating at this time, but what I would say is there's a really good bit of research that was published recently by Dr. Karen McAllister through the Simon community, and her research was very much focused on the impact of ACEs, now albeit in the context of housing. It really did show some stark findings, and in particularly how children and young people from here are different from their peers, in that we're living in a society emerging from conflict, and that ongoing legacy and the impact of power and control in communities is still having in terms of ACEs. So that might be an interesting one for you to look at, in terms of how the minister and the department and the education authority are grappling with this issue. I suppose I would argue strongly that our teaching and non-teaching staff should be trained in trauma-informed practice. We know a lot more about it now, and there's a lot of work in the field. Maybe it's something that we can look at further in terms of your specific question. Unless, Joanne, you wanted to... Do you want to rate the Minister?
No pressure.
I'll join you in not doing that, Chris.
So just a 1 to 10 is fine if you want to go there.
Yeah, I think it's a really important question because it's so important, and we do hear it time and time again. It's so important that we're trauma informed when we're dealing with children and young people, and also that we recognise that SEN doesn't sit alone, and that children and young people and investment in children and young people with SEN or otherwise will have such benefits for society, their future, and society in general.
That's brilliant. Thank you all.
Thank you,
That's
Cara.
my questions. Thank you.
And thank you, Cara, and David, you're the last in there.
Thanks very much, Chair, and thanks for your answer so far. We covered a lot of the main ground. I'll have to say I happen to think that this is an area that there isn't great chasms between different parties. Everybody wants to see better vision for our children, and it's right that we have proper scrutiny of that, but I think most people want to head in the same direction around this. I also think in talking around the whether schools should be compelled, I think it's absolutely right that some schools have concerns about whether they'll be supported and need reassurance in that. I think it's also right that there are some schools that are just resistant to providing those services, and I don't think we talk about grammars, I don't think it's limited to grammars in that sense, but I do think the Minister, when he was last here, Minister or some of the officials did say that they've had quite a few schools put their hands up going forward to try and help that, and I think that's positive. I've only really one, possibly two, but one question, because as I say, I think a lot of the main questions have been answered, and it was just to touch on a bit more and get more from you around that sort of the Children's Services Corporation Act, and the committee has grappled and been frustrated, I think, at times in trying to see greater collaboration between education and health, and I think I have, and I think committee has, but I'm not going to speak for committee. I certainly have felt at times that officials haven't wanted to throw colleagues onto the bus, but there seems to be greater resistance on the health side, or more complexity, I think, probably on the health side maybe as well. There's maybe good reason for it, but that has stopped maybe some of those teams and so on really properly coming together. In your experience in dealing with some of the difficult and complex cases that you deal with, I was wondering if you could give some insight into where you see that and where you think that there needs to be and could be greater collaboration in that way, and in that spirit, opening up, understanding that there is complexities and difficulties for them doing that.
Yeah, I mean, Joanne, you asked a really great question earlier about the how bit. You know, how health and education can collaborate better.
Yeah, and certainly when we see that in individual cases, when it does happen, it's so positive. So examples of children that are absent from education, and a multidisciplinary team have been convened, and health and education work together, can have really positive outcomes, both in terms of education but also in terms of their life at home, how their placements remain stable. We also see that at times there isn't the resource or the provision there to make that work, and you're asking about how it can, or where it's not working. Or?
I guess I mean we've looked at in terms of those teams, and I certainly have felt at times that really what we're seeing is a health team and an education team being built up, and they might meet occasionally, or but they're not forming one team. They're not necessarily. And I think certainly when we've talked about that in the past, I think we've wanted to see that genuine collaboration and coming together of those teams. And it's not to say there's not good work being done. And again, none of us are in those positions, and they're probably good complexity. I think resource has a huge amount to do with it, and that sort of silo mentality which you can criticise, but it's a real thing of departments feeling there's not enough resource to come around, and worrying about where that can lead if they go down that path. I guess, are you seeing some of that? Are you seeing progress in that? And if you're not, where are you seeing those obstacles, and where can it be improved?
Yeah, I do feel, sorry, Joanne.
Well, I was just going to say information sharing seems to be such a barrier, and I think that is key, because it's key to informing the amount of SEN support and what support we need, as well as actually the provider itself. So I think that is one of the key problems. I think there are a lot of people that want it to happen, and you hear that and are trying to work to make it happen. But it seems to be a lot of the time a resource issue. I know the LIT teams, the intention is for health as well to become more part of that, but it doesn't seem to have happened. And I think it really needs to happen. I think what sometimes is missed when we're talking about resources is that if we don't intervene early, perhaps it's not missed, but if we don't intervene early, we end up with much more difficult needs further down the line, and the resource issue becomes much bigger. And I think we need to step back and look at if it is resource that is the reason, what is the cost of doing nothing or not doing enough in the early stages?
It was the impact into us probably primarily thinking of, but no,
Yeah.
thank you very much for that insight. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, David. Just a couple of things on that. I wanted to pick up on just something really, just a comment really at this stage that you referenced earlier, and it's not often the way that it's framed. I think there's often a sense that education is a drain on health resources, trying to draw them into the system. That's the narrative that we get, and that the resources are stretched, and I don't doubt that is the case. Resources are stretched, in terms of access to AHPs and all of that, but I thought your framing of it, that there needs to be a mechanism for health to refer into education, almost as that early sort of indication that there is an additional need here, and that should be done early. I'm not sure that such a mechanism exists, or if it's clear, or if all the trusts operate in the same way. So I think that's something quite tangible. I think we can take away to to see how that and who can do that. Is it only health visitors, or can social workers, can GPs? So I think that's in terms of that data sharing, that's really important. So.
Just very quickly on that point, certainly health practitioners can refer for statutory assessment, but what I'm talking about is earlier,
a more early indication there is
upstream,
likely to be an additional need, so that services can be planned rather than this individual child needs something now. And I think it's shifting that it's not just about individual children's needs, it's helping the system plan.
Yes.
Yeah. So no, I thought that was really helpful. And on that, again, it's just a very, very final point, and I think the EA may speak to this in later evidence sessions in more detail, but when we've had the EA in, they have very much focused on, we have limited resources, so we can only do so much. In terms of transformation, we're really looking at what the support model looks like for a child who receives a statement. We think that's where really we can get a really substantial, meaningful reform in. Mm-hmm. I'm not hearing so much that they think that's that really early stuff, even preschool interventions. Yeah. Where would you sit on that? I mean, if you have a limited budget, would you be saying get it into the early interventions, or get it into the children who are already into the system, who need the support? Or is that not a fair question, maybe in terms of where it's best?
These are the things that keep me awake at night, to be honest. It's a really good question. I do feel really strongly that if you get that early intervention bit right, it's going to save you money, it's going to improve outcomes for children, it's going to improve outcomes for families. We definitely need to invest more in early intervention, but we need to find a way that we're not disadvantaging children who are in the system. And I think some of those things could be game changers. That the question that you just asked about information sharing at an early stage.
Doesn't have to be hugely expensive.
No. I mean, a childminder, a health visitor will be able to spot, they won't be able to spot everything, but they'll be able to spot signs. Let's get the process started with babies and infants, and not wait until they're 4 in November to get them a place for September.
Well, I don't want to take up too much more time, because everyone's been pushed for time. Look, thank you for your evidence today. As always, lots of things cropping up in there that probably fall outside the scope of the inquiry, and that we may want to hear from you again. I think attendance just emerges consistently, and we do look forward to that research. We have DE and EA in the next number of weeks on the issue of attendance, so I think your research could be quite timely then, aligning with that, so we'll hopefully be in touch. But thank you both for your
great.
time.
Thank you. Thanks for your time.
Thanks. Okay. So obviously all of that has been recorded and will be added into the inquiry evidence. Is there anything specific arising out of that anybody wanted to raise? Kathy?
Just on the figures that I think it was Thomas Adele at the time had assured us, I think on a number of occasions, that we would get those figures if we could chase those up.
Literacy support, was that?
Yeah. It was, and I hope that is the case, that there are more children
around
getting
that question of are more or less children getting support. Yes, I think that would be something worth chasing with the EA if that's not already in progress.
Well, so I know we have. I think we have asked this on a number of occasions now, so it'd be great to see if we could get something on it.
Happy that's noted. Okay. Well, I think other than that, and that all will be added into the inquiry evidence. It moves us on to the next item. Just before I start that, I just want to on a really, really practical point. I think some members are indicating sort of very early, maybe while I'm going through my questions, and others are waiting until I've sort of formally said I'll bring other members in, just to make sure that we're fair, so that nobody feels that there's any imbalance. If I could just ask, I'll formally say what I'm going to ask members to indicate, just so that everybody's working off the same time scale, because it's it's just important if we're operating the same system for everybody. So I'll just note that again at that point. So item 7 then is a briefing from the General Teaching Council of Northern Ireland, and that is in relation to the General Teaching Council bill, and members should all have a copy of their bill in front of them. So just while the witnesses are getting seated, I'll refer members to the clerk's briefing at page 157. There's also a table setting out the issues that have been raised on the bill, and that's at page 160, and a briefing paper from GTCNI, which is at page 3 of tabled papers. I just want to highlight in terms of that table that was provided, I want to put my thanks on record for the provision of that. It's very, very helpful, and I think it will be, hopefully, as that table, the evidence expands, and that will really help members in terms of their consideration of the bill. So I think that's a really helpful addition just from members' papers, but I wanted to put that on record in terms of thanks to the team for that. Now handing over to the witnesses, I'll do brief introductions, but obviously if there's anything that I get wrong or you want to add to, feel free to do so. So joining us today from GTCNI, we have Gallagher, who is the Interim CEO Registrar at the General Teaching Council for Northern Ireland. We have Mary Jackson, the Head of Corporate Services at GTCNI, and Julianne Stevenson, Head of Professional Standards at GTCNI. Again, please feel free to correct me. It has been known for me to get job titles wrong. So thank you for your time today and for coming to give evidence in relation to the bill, and thank you for the briefing paper that you've provided. I really will hand over to you at this stage. I don't know if there are any initial remarks you want to make, or if you do just want to walk through the bill with any clause by clause reflections that you want to make. But I think I'll hand over to you and ask if that could be for up to 10 minutes in terms of time, and then we'll move into question and answer. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Chair and members, and I'd like to begin by thanking the committee for this opportunity to provide a background on GTCNI's rules and functions in the context of the General Teaching Council bill. As you'll know, GTCNI was established under the Education Northern Ireland Order of 1998 as a professional body for teachers in Northern Ireland, and as an NDPB of the Department of Education, GTCNI has a statutory remit to create and maintain a register of teachers eligible to teach in grant-aided schools, to provide regulatory functions, and to provide advice to the department and employing authorities on professional matters. And there's currently over 28,500 teachers active on GTCNI's register of teachers. As you're aware, GTCNI had for a number of years struggled to discharge its functions effectively, and the Independent Board Effectiveness Review of 2021 concluded that the Leadership Council, or Board, which was 33 members who represented the teaching profession, it was, quote, dysfunctional, deeply flawed and irredeemably divided, close quotes. The then Education Minister accepted that review's recommendations, announcing in the Assembly in December 21 that she would stand down the Council or Board immediately, and that DE would bring forward legislation to dissolve GTCNI. But in the meantime, GTCNI would come under direct departmental oversight. And at that stage, DE introduced a series of interim oversight and governance arrangements to ensure robust and proportionate performance monitoring and accountability arrangements remained in place. And those arrangements also made sure that staff in GTCNI could receive continuing support and guidance for their ongoing work. Previous special measures were also put in place in November 19, and they were subsumed into those new governance and oversight arrangements. So since June 2022, a new GTCNI senior management team emerged with considerable public sector career experience. I was appointed in June of that year, and Mary to my right joined in September. A DE employee, I'm designated GTCNI's accounting officer by DE's accounting officer, and I'm personally responsible for safeguarding the public funds that are under my control and for day-to-day operation and management of GTCNI. So since 2022, we have worked to address the numerous governance, staffing and operational challenges which necessitated the department intervening. And the new SMT has successfully led, revitalised and transformed GTCNI. Highlights have included developing, implementing and introducing in April 2023 a new teachers registration system just over 7 months from contract award, and this project had failed to progress for the previous 5 years. We've published 5 sets of unqualified annual reports and accounts. We have successfully addressed 45 historic audit recommendations.
We've developed and implemented best practice HR policies, including GTCNI's first performance management system, and we've also addressed information management weaknesses by developing a suite of data protection related policies and delivering staff training. At the same time as all of that, we have simultaneously complied with all governance and other annual and periodic returns that need to be made to the department, including on areas such as budgeting and financial areas, corporate risk management and corporate and business plans. That is all in accordance with normal NDPB requirements, all with just 15 staff. The EU recognised this progress and stated in December 2024 that the department recognises that under your leadership and with the active support of GTCNI's entire staff team, the last 2.5 years have been transformative, with progress made in addressing the numerous governance, staffing and operational challenges you've inherited. The progress was closely monitored with the department's audit committee, your internal auditors and the Northern Ireland Audit Office all confirming these successes. So, Chair, that sets a scene, and members, and just now turning to consider GTCNI's role in the new legislation by various clauses, I'll hand over first to Julianne.
We look at Clause 7, Provisional Registration. This will allow GTCNI to provisionally register persons whose qualifications have minor deficiencies against GTCNI's qualification requirements. Such persons will be able to work as teachers for a stipulated period, during which time they must provide evidence that they have remedied the identified deficits before they can receive full registration. This approach will help to reduce barriers to entry to the teaching profession. Clause 8, Further Training. This will periodically require teachers to revalidate their professional standing by evidencing their continued participation in teacher professional learning, similar to other professions. GTCNI notes that regulations and commencement orders for clauses 7 and 8 will only be brought forward following appropriate consultation with the teaching profession and key stakeholders. Along with education stakeholders and in consultation with the profession, GTCNI should clearly have a role in ensuring joined-up strategic development occurs in relation to new teacher induction, early professional development and continuing professional development, all of which will potentially underpin teachers' career progression into leadership pathways within school settings. In the future, GTCNI's vision would be to offer a scheme of bursaries to recognise and acknowledge best practice and innovation within the profession, from initial teacher education through to leadership roles in consultation with education stakeholders. Clause 9, Rules relating to registration. As a keeper of the register, GTCNI delivers a protective / supportive regulation function to safeguard both children and teachers in education through our approval of qualifications, assessment and admittance to the register processes. The legislative changes clarifies that the department can set out matters that it considers what must be included in GTCNI's registration rules, but in essence still provides GTCNI with a large degree of freedom to write its rules in collaboration and consultation with stakeholders. In the absence of a functioning board or council, it is currently very difficult for GTCNI to justify stepping away from its established council-approved rules, despite an evolving initial teacher education qualifications landscape. For example, you have recently heard concerns raised about IPGCE and IQTS initial teacher education courses offered by a number of English providers which lead to qualified teacher status. While acknowledging the need for flexibility of routes into teaching, this potentially could be seen to increase the risk of dilution of our quality standards. As GTCNI's qualification rules stand, achievement of QTS allows entry onto a register and we cannot deviate from this. When a functioning board or council is in place, GTCNI does intend to review its qualification rules to ensure standards are maintained whilst not introducing insurmountable barriers to entry. As part of its statutory remit, GTCNI also provides advice to the department and employing authorities on professional matters. This includes accrediting local ITE programmes and courses and developing a modern, fit-for-purpose teacher competencies framework. This can only partially progress for a limited period of time without a functioning board or council in place. Full accreditation and re-accreditation processes must be implemented to prevent delays in registering Northern Ireland graduate applicants. I'm going to hand over to Mary now.
In turning to Clause 10 on offences, the aim is to create a preventative barrier to fraudulent representation of teaching qualifications, letters of professional standing, completion of induction and or early professional development documents by an applicant to our register or to a register in another jurisdiction. While this relates to a small number of cases at this point in time, this would close another current weakness in our powers. Clause 11, disciplinary powers. GTCNI currently has limited powers regarding the sanctioning of teachers. They can effectively either do nothing or remove a teacher from the register. The latter is only in extremely limited circumstances, relying mainly on a DBS barring order or notification from another teaching regulator. GTCNI cannot currently regulate the profession the same way neighbouring teaching councils in GB and Ireland can do. The bill will create a framework enabling us to investigate allegations of unacceptable professional conduct or serious professional incompetence and to act where those allegations are upheld. On receipt of a referral, GTCNI will conduct an initial triage, making recommendations to either an interim suspension committee, and that would be for high-risk child safeguarding referrals, or to an investigating committee. And in due course, a hearing may then be held by a fitness to practice committee and potentially a fitness to practice appeal committee. And the bill will provide a power for registrants against whom a sanction is applied to also have the right of recourse for appeal to the High Court. All committees will have independent members, and no GTCNI board or staff member will sit on any of these committees. During the regulatory process, the registrant about whom the referral has been received will have information on their rights of representation and also signposts to wellbeing and support resources. While not involved in all decision-making stages of the regulatory process, it is envisaged that GTCNI will assure the integrity through the design and governance of documentation and procedures which will be subjected to external legal review and opinion and board agreement before implementation. So to conclude, you'll be glad to hear, the bill creates fit-for-purpose board and committee structures, and the department proposes that members of the board and committees are appointed through a skills and experience-based public appointments process. By addressing weaknesses in GTCNI's current regulatory functions, the bill enables GTCNI to establish committees consisting of non-board members to consider misconduct and serious professional incompetence referrals from various sources, including members of the public. GTCNI will be able to impose a range of sanctions as determined by these committees, and these will include reprimands, conditional registration orders, suspension orders or prohibition orders. And while there is considerable work still to be done to come up with the practical procedures that the organisation will need to put in place, we believe we can say that they address current areas of weakness for GTCNI or propose useful additions to our current powers, and we welcome these changes. We realise much needs to be done, and we welcome the opportunity to continue to transform GTCNI into the fit-for-purpose professional body for teachers, as was always the intention. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you all for those opening remarks in relation to the bill. The first thing I wanted to ask, and this may be for the department, and if it is, we'll just move on from it. I mean, there has been some sort of initial discussion around the decision to effectively legislate to improve and enhance and reform the structures that we have rather than dissolve the GTC as initially had been suggested with a brand new body. And there's been consultation work around that and business cases and value for money cases, I think, as well. Do you know, is that material available to be shared with the committee? Is that something that could be shared to help us understand the thinking process to how we arrived at the bill we have and why options were considered or discounted? Is that something that could be shared?
Certainly, Chair, at the minute, that information, that would be a question for the department. As they
yeah.
led on the
process. It might be, but I wanted to check on that at this stage, so I'll not pursue that any further with you. You'll probably be aware we had evidence from the teaching unions last week, and they came out very clearly to say that they didn't think that the bill was fit for purpose because they didn't think as drafted it did create an independent regulatory body, and they felt that it created a body that was very much still at the behest of the department. So and that was their concern. And I think particularly they highlighted some of the provisions in the bill that allow the department to make regulations that can require GTCNI to do, well, looking at clause 9, potentially anything. We don't quite know what the department's intentions are there. I wondered what your response to that would be. Do you feel that the bill provides the structures to create an independent fit for purpose regulatory body, or do you have any concerns, and particularly clause 9, if you don't mind speaking to that, around what some of those things that you may be required to do that aren't currently detailed?
From a strategic perspective, education is a spectrum, and GTCNI are part of that spectrum, and the Department of Education, in a way, is at the head of the spectrum, answerable to the Minister. GTCNI can't create rules for registration in isolation. If there is joined up thinking between the Department for Economy on what it constitutes successful ITE in a HEI in Northern Ireland, and also how that ITE is then quality assured, and the skill sets that come out of that into our teachers and into our classrooms, GTCNI could not set the rules alone without giving due consideration to what is further back on the spectrum in terms of the outcomes for children and young people in an education setting. So in a way, if you say we're tied to the department in that respect, in terms of what they would like to see in our regulations, that would be correct. But the regulations and the qualification rules in particular, are set by GTCNI in conjunction with its board. We currently operate to the last set that was approved, I think, in 2017, with some updates in 2019, and we have not deviated from those in all but what is necessarily legislative. For example, we are no longer part of the EU, and therefore we had to just amend one of the rules slightly to reflect that in terms of the way it was worded. But we have stuck with these because they are approved by the board of GTCNI and need to be reviewed, and that needs to be done again.
So do you see any potential sort of points of conflict emerging out of this legislation? So again, thinking about clause 9, that if the department makes regulations that require you to do something, and that the board, when appointed, as this legislation would set out, says actually we don't think that's appropriate. We don't think that's an appropriate intervention in the regulatory space, or in terms of qualifications or teacher competencies. There's potential for conflict there.
I think there is, Chair, absolutely, but I think that's the point we would hope to get to, that when we do have a fully functioning organisation again, including a board of members, that those members will be responsible for setting a strategic direction for the organisation and everything that it does, and also in consultation with the key stakeholders, including the education family. We will want to ensure that we are creating a fit-for-purpose professional body for teachers.
I understand your answer, and I think maybe it's getting to some of those questions around appointments versus elections, and if you have a proper sort of fit-for-purpose board that can function and make decisions, it might navigate some of those points of conflict. But I suppose if there's a profound and unanimous view from the board that regulations that are being imposed on the council are not appropriate in the regulatory space, I think that's maybe where the union's concerns were, that you don't have the independence to say, actually, no, we're not going to do that. Am I reading the legislation as drafted correct?
I think that's a right way of interpreting it as well.
Okay.
At this stage, I could say we're not there, we're not in that space, but I can understand the union's position, where they're coming from in that.
Certainly to be picked up with the department again, and we don't know what regulations they intend to bring or don't. I wanted just to pick up on clause 11, and that's the one that has Schedule 1A associated with it, which sets out much more extensive disciplinary powers. And I certainly don't dispute that your current state of affairs, where you can either do nothing or effectively remove someone from the register, and there's nothing in between, doesn't feel an appropriate sort of spectrum of powers to have. So definitely there needs to be an intervention there in that space, I would agree. But reading Schedule 1A, it is still framed as that regulations may follow that create powers along these lines, and I just wondered, have you had any engagement with the department on that, or any reflections on that in terms of that potentially still creating some uncertainty that we don't actually know if everything that's in Schedule 1A is what's going to come out of the regulations? Have you had engagement on that?
I think obviously we're still at an early stage of the bill and this whole process, but we do have to think ahead, and I think there will be a set of rules and regulations that come out. As you said yourself, Chair, the current position is not sustainable going forward, so we need to have some sort of framework where we can actually regulate the profession properly. It happens in all the other teaching councils across these islands, and we would hope to follow suit, to have similar sort of system in place and a framework that will allow us to regulate the profession appropriately. So while there's much work still to be done on fleshing out the detail, I think at this stage we will want to make sure that we are that fit for purpose professional body.
Again, potentially for the department in terms of their clear intentions and that. So last question for me, and I imagine other members may want to pick up on fees. I'll not go down the route of whether teachers should or shouldn't pay. It's just on that clause 12 itself, because I note you didn't reference it. It's currently framed that the fee charged must cover the costs of running GTC, and potentially can be higher than that. Do you have any sense, based on your current operations and where you would like to get to, what you think that likely cost would be? Because I mean, you operationally understand what this looks like.
The £44 fee, which was first lifted in 2007 and has remained unchanged since, despite inflationary uplifts in all operating costs, just about covers our current work profile of just 15 members of staff delivering the services on the reduced remit that we currently deliver. That £44, based on a membership of in around 28,500 on the active register, will not cover any of the services or the remit that is intended to be widened by the changes in legislation, and that would include regulation and the costs of setting up and maintaining lists of panels and potential memberships for panels and running of panels. It will not offer any wider review of qualifications to include, you know, a more in-depth assessment of, say, minor shortfalls that might lead you to be able to be provisionally registered and then undertake a programme of shortfall makeup, and how that is to be mentored and then measured and assessed when it comes back in. To deliver all of these functions, we estimate that we're going to need an organisation size initially of in around 22 people. If you apply inflation uplifts over roughly the last 20 years to that £44, if you said inflation was on average 2.5% per year, you'd be sitting looking at a fee in the high 70s. If you said it was 1.5% a year, you'd be looking at a fee in the mid 50s. So £44 is a fee that was set 20 years ago and never changed.
It's certainly, you anticipate costs are going to go up,
yes.
And I'll leave others to cover whether they feel that teachers should or shouldn't pay. Would there be an appetite to use the powers in clause 12 to charge more than it costs to break even?
It's not for an arm's length body of government to make a surplus. To make any kind of profit or take a surplus from its activities at all. Our intention would be to, as much as possible, break even, whilst recognising the fact that we need to make a commitment to the potential for future reinvestment in, for example, major asset replacement, major teacher systems, or expansion of that register to cover those things that we've talked about, like provisional registration categories or student member categories, or how to capture continuing professional development or teacher learning. So all of that will create a bigger register with, heavier charges and potentially more numbers of staff.
Well, we can pick that up with the department, because certainly clause 12 does, the bit that is going to be inserted, it does suggest that you can charge a fee that's in excess of the service you're providing. So it is there. But I mean, again, perhaps one to pick up with the department as to,
because that certainly wouldn't be our intention.
Wouldn't be your intention.
No.
Okay,
it would be, and you've seen it before in other organisations, where there is a known major investment requirement coming up in an organisation, and it may well be to fund it across a number of years. There is either a temporary uplift or a permanent uplift in a fee of some kind to generate the reserves, if you like, that are required to meet those investment needs. But it is not a surplus for the sake of a surplus. It is with an intended outcome.
That's helpful. Again, perhaps some of the rationale of the clause can be picked up in the department. So I'll bring the Deputy Chair in if members want to indicate then for any questions.
Do you accept that the GTCNI, as it will be constituted after this bill is enacted, will not be an independent organisation?
As the bill currently stands, yes, I think chair members we see it would be remain a body associated or linked to the Department of Education. I think that is a model that is similar to other teaching councils across these islands as well. That there is that relationship, very close relationship with the parent department. However, certainly, as I say, with a new council or board membership structure in place, those members should be able to make independent decisions in that sense. And we did have the discussion about if it brought us into conflict with the department, where would that take us? But actually being able to get a council there representing the profession and bringing in other members with skills that they can bring to a board will hopefully put the organisation in a good place and be able to deliver for teachers across the country.
In terms of the other organisations and other jurisdictions on these islands, would they be more or less reflective of the teaching profession?
Can you?
No, it's okay. No, it's okay. I was just thinking it out in my head there. I think from memory in Scotland and in Ireland, I think certainly all the members are from the teaching profession.
You see,
and Wales, I can't remember. I think there's some. They are Welsh government appointments, so I think half at least are teachers.
Yeah, and they have 13 different types of categories on their register, so it's not just teachers. So the Welsh model is slightly different.
One of the arguments the unions will put forward is that, one, it's not going to be independent, and two, it's not going to be reflective of the teaching profession. So why then should the teaching profession fund it?
When you say not reflective of the teaching profession, if you look at SAPANI public appointment processes, it is most likely, in fact very likely, that 50% of the membership will be representative of the profession. What you find is, with an arm's length body, which will always be accountable to its sponsor department and to the minister for that department, and there's no getting away from that, but is independent in terms of its daily operations, you need to ensure that you are representing the best skill set required to represent the interest of the profession. And that, yes, will include teachers, but it may also include experts in the fields of law or finance. And perhaps some of those skills need to be brought to bear on a board to ensure that there is balance in terms of review of, potentially tough decisions that have to be made or future investment.
I mean, there's absolutely no argument against that. I mean, particularly if there are disciplinary proceedings happen, you'll need expertise in that field and in the field of HR and so on and so forth. But if teachers aren't represented, I come back to my question. If it's not representative of teachers and it's not independent, why should they pay for it?
But it depends on your definition of independence, because all arm's length bodies who deliver services for various government departments, they are accountable to the departments, but they are independent of the departments and operate with their own boards and their own management structures.
And I understand that, but that's why my first question was, is it going to be independent? And the answer was no.
That is the degree of independence, and that is the setup of boards across NDPBs in the public sector in Northern Ireland. I mean, if you were to move down the executive agency route, there's less independence. So the closer you go to your sponsor department, the less independence and autonomy there is. The point of having a board of directors is that they represent the interests of the profession and bring to bear those other areas of expertise that help it make decisions. And it will be up to the teaching profession and the employing authorities and the individual schools to determine how, within SAPANI public appointment processes, to ensure that every sector is represented on the board in some way or another.
Okay, fair enough. I want to move on to another issue. I haven't a lot of time. And I've made representations on behalf of a number of teachers who have qualified in the South and have had difficulty being registered here in the North. What are the obstacles? Because my understanding is that teacher training in the south is well regulated and very highly regarded.
We anticipated this, so
absolutely. What I would say on that, and Pat, if you don't mind, if I can take it back very briefly to your fees question and independence and why should teachers pay. We are hoping and planning that GTCNI will be the professional body for teachers. And so it's almost like a professional fee that they're paying to be part of that professional body for the teaching profession. But turning to your questions on applicants from Ireland, in the period from 2020 to 26, GTCNI received 69 applications in total from people who had done their initial training, or teacher education training in Ireland. And of those 69, 56 were accepted. So 13 were declined. And I don't want to go into the specifics, but just to let you know, about a third of them actually who were declined, they didn't actually have an initial teacher education qualification. So they wouldn't have met our criteria, or and that's okay.
And I have no difficulty with that. I'm talking about students who qualify with a teaching degree, or the equivalent of PGCE.
A number of them who've applied to us, and I presume these are the ones that you're referring to. They may not have met our requirements in full. They didn't have the equivalent, for example, of a GCSE in either maths or science, which is required for certain roles. And others of them, the other third who were declined, there were shortfalls in their initial.
Let me just stop you on that point on the GCE maths or science. If a teacher is qualified to teach, for example, French and Italian, even if they haven't got maths or science at the equivalent of GCE, are you saying they can't be registered?
That is currently in our qualification rules. That was the board adopted and approved position when they brought in these qualification rules.
And I think that
and just clarify for me, could a student here get a PGCE without having those GCEs? My understanding is they wouldn't, certainly not without maths.
They wouldn't be entered. Would be entered on.
Yeah.
I think this is maybe a wider question than just for GTCNI, because you have to go back and look at what is the Northern Ireland standard for basically a certificate of education, and it does talk about GCSEs at grade C, minimum standard across English, across maths, etc. So this is outside of GTCNI, which is why it's reflected within GTCNI. If that changes at the national level, that would obviously be then adapted within the qualification rules.
If I can just add as well,
Ian, if you could,
just to your question, Pat. We understand in clause 7 there's that category of provisional registration, and while if it was enacted the way it's written at the minute, that it may enable teachers who had those shortfalls to apply with us and then get the evidence required to enable them to achieve full registration over a stipulated period. But currently, that's not possible.
We don't have the capacity.
So just briefly, Chair, just for argument's sake, let's say someone from the south applied, they hadn't got the equivalent of GCE maths, but they could be provisionally registered and told, listen, go away, and if you can do a GCE in a year or 2 years or whatever time,
back to us.
But could they be teaching in the meantime?
No, because they wouldn't be able to be admitted to our register as our current rules stand. If enacted, this was enacted as it was.
What would the effect of a provisional registration be then?
Basically, it could they've had some sort of shortfall to meet our requirements for full registration in that sense, and we're trying to give them the opportunity to.
It wouldn't make any material difference to their ability to teach here in the north.
In a sense, no, they would get provisional registration, and would be able to teach.
Can I just like to clarify that, because I'm not sure if I've followed that, so I'm just checking. Current provision, someone can go away and get the qualifications, but they can't teach. But under the new provision, if they were provisionally registered, they could potentially be permitted to teach while acquiring the required qualifications.
Yes, with accepted shortfalls. So there would be a list of accepted shortfalls, and at the moment GCSE maths absence would not be an accepted shortfall because of the national standard.
But as you say, at the minute, if somebody has that shortfall in maths or science, as we've given the example of, if they went away and got that qualification and came back to us, we would absolutely consider their application and likely would be entered onto our register, subject to meeting all our other suitability checks.
The shortfall could be actually going into school and to gather the workplace or the placement area of it and being able to be signed off at that part. Yeah. There's so many hours that they have to they would be expected to do, and then that would close that deviation for them.
I'm not sure I've 100% followed that. Other members may want to pick up, and we
Okay.
can possibly
There's
revisit
a
it.
stipulation.
Maybe it's just good to get this cleared up now. So, I mean, effectively, you're saying provisional registration,
Yes.
in theory, allows people to go away to make up the difference that they need in their qualification. But there are some minimum standards you could never deviate from, GCSE maths being one of them.
Currently, because of...
But will this legislation change that, or is that at a GB level?
No,
the
that's
issue?
at a higher level than us.
Okay.
But if they
That
had a
would be another
shortfall
thing.
in hours of teaching that's required as part of their initial qualification, we could provisionally register them, and they could make up those hours of shortfalls as they took on a role within a school. And then we would then register that the shortfall had been made up, and we would move them from provisional to, say, full registration. So for minor shortfalls, for smaller things, not, the larger degree type issues, we could say to them, we can let you onto the register, you can take up that role in that school, and over the next 6 months or 8 months or one academic year, we expect the shortfall to be made up, and we expect that to be mentored and witnessed within your school. And then we would assess that and move them from provisional to full registration. So again, it's in an effort to reduce barriers to entry.
Clarity is important here. Yeah.
Just one final one. Is it possible to obtain a teaching qualification in the South without the equivalent of maths GCE?
Would have to check that.
Yeah.
Don't know the answer to that.
Because you're
Yeah.
saying people here can't get on the register even though they have a teaching qualification but haven't got the
There's
equivalent.
different levels when
Yeah.
it comes to the leaving certificate for maths and English, and it's what equates over.
Yeah.
So
So if somebody did pass maths, that may fall below the minimum acceptable standard here in Northern Ireland, but if they did the higher level in maths, that may meet our minimum standard on the grade C GCSE maths equivalency, and that would then transfer over and be acceptable. Again, every case has to be assessed individually. There's no blanket approval for applicants from the South. It is a case-by-case assessment on what they have done.
Okay. Perhaps more maybe to be revisited. I have an indication from John and no other members, so please do come in if you're looking to.
Hi, Nick. Thank you. That was really informative. So I'm having a couple of IT issues today. I seem to be dropping in and out of reception. So the first of all is the issue of fees. There is a sort of feeling that teachers are paying for something that they don't get anything back for. Do you have any view on that? Why should teachers be actually paying a fee for this?
I think, Chair and members, John, to specifically answer your question there, you could certainly argue that over the last number of years since I've been in the organisation, that there was a lot of work that I had to come in and resolve and issues to clear up. But I think now some of the highlights that we have successfully implemented in the last number of years, such as a new teachers registration system, I think that is one example of how we as an organisation are trying to provide some benefit to the teaching community and wider workforce. But we do realise it will take time. We realise that our regulatory powers, for example, are very limited at the moment, so hopefully this legislation will help fix that. But again, maybe coming back to a question that was asked earlier, the thing about GTCNI being the professional body for teachers, we would hope that that's what it will be, and it will be reshaped and reborn, but that does take money to cover our costs in all that we do, and so we would hope that the teachers would be in due course that they would be happy to pay the membership fee to GTCNI every year.
Yeah, I sort of put myself in their shoes. I was paying for a subscription for something for the last number of years and felt I wasn't getting anything. And now they say, well, it's going to be better now and you can keep paying. There might be a reservoir of sort of distrust. But look, I'll move on. Question around credibility. Given the purpose of the bill is to fix the long-standing governance and accountability failures within GTCNI or GTCNI, what assurances can you give me that the committee can you give the committee that the council is actually capable of delivering the cultural and organisational change the legislation requires?
I think, John, in response to that, I would say that certainly the current senior management team in GTCNI has even the keel of the organisation, and we have sorted out the initial governance difficulties and issues that had to be resolved when I took up post almost 4 years ago. It has taken us a long time to get there, longer than I had hoped, but we have got there. We're now at this position now where we're able to go forward with hopefully putting in place the legislation and then all the other rules, etc. below that will make a professional body that teachers can be proud to be a part of. It's going to take time, we realise that, and we are very limited in that there's only 15 staff of us at the moment doing our best, but hopefully even before this legislation came in, we would hope maybe to try and get some comms out to teachers and the wider profession to try and begin to re-engage with them ahead of a new revamped organisation coming along in due course.
So you do accept there is a real need to build trust around credibility and that there has been a change of culture?
Absolutely.
Final question is around registration. Why does it take so long to register teachers returning to Northern Ireland from other parts of the United Kingdom?
Members, I certainly am not aware of that being an issue. We do have it out on our website, and we tell applicants when they apply that it will take up to 6 weeks from them providing all required information and having paid their £44 fee to be registered. We don't think that's very long. It could be, John, in particular to that maybe some person or some applicants have forgotten to send us, for example, their initial teacher education qualification. Without that, we can't go off and do our checks to make sure that they have received that qualification. They think they have provided it. We know they haven't. We've contacted them, and really until that's resolved, we can't progress our application. But what I would say is, by and large, there's no application taking longer than it should be that I'm currently aware of.
We do.
But is that measured? I mean, do you have data? Is there performance management data around that?
We do, yes, and we are consistently, actually, I think, in those areas, particularly for rest of UK applicants, we are registering applicants within 5 weeks of them getting all the information to us.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'll maybe ask that from that data from the Minister in a written question, but I appreciate your answers. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, John. I have an indication from David.
Thanks very much, Chair. And if you followed last week's session, you may anticipate some discussion of this as well. I just wanted to touch on probably one of the benefits that teachers and other professions get from professional bodies and regulators, and I guess it's passive, it's in the background, and therefore you don't necessarily recognise it like a lot of this stuff, is the protection of the value of their qualifications. We had some discussion and some difference of opinion around the quality and so on of the PCG being offered by Coventry even with IQTS and how that's working and then how that might be assessed. And I guess I just wanted you to talk to in terms of the recognition of different qualifications and quality assurance, what role you have in that, and maybe specifically on that PCGE, but also in general.
If I may, IQTS, when it was first launched, in fact, when it was first debated quite a number of years ago in terms of from England's perspective with their Department for Education in looking at an international education strategy which they published in 2021. Its intention was primarily to look at those who do not live in England to undertake a teaching qualification to add to the register, and that approved providers in providing this IQTS would lead the pathway automatically to the obtaining of QTS, which is qualified teacher status in England and Wales and allows you to teach there. When the programme was launched, and I will do quote unquote for this if you do not mind, applicants for IQTS train and live where they live and work with no need to visit England. IQTS is suitable for both non-UK and UK citizens living outside of England. All you had to do was live outside of England. So you could live in Northern Ireland, you could live in Wales, or you could live in Scotland and undertake IQTS. It is not what we were anticipating. But because TES have verified it, who are attached to the Department for Education, as aligning the obtaining of QTS, qualified teacher status, and we recognise qualified teacher status in the qualification rules that we've already referred to, which were approved by our previous board, which we do know need to be updated. We have no recourse but to accept IQTS from those providers who have been approved by TES and therefore the Department for Education in England, and accept those who have done one academic year of IQTS, because it leads to QTS, and QTS is recognised on our qualification rules. Sorry if that sounded around the houses, but that's where we're at with it. In terms of the
dilution,
dilution,
get access to employment via that. Is there anything to compel them to further that qualification?
Those who undertake IQTS.
Yes.
Sorry, can you repeat that?
No, in the if I've understood
Yes.
your question correctly, no, in the sense that because they've got that IQTS qualification, it automatically grants the QTS status.
So it's not necessarily a step to anything. The qualification is recognised as equal, essentially.
Yeah.
And from what I'm hearing, and you may not want to speak to this, but from what I'm hearing, reading between the lines of what you're saying, you feel that you're compelled to recognise a qualification that you do not believe to be of similar rigour as other PCGA qualifications.
If I may refer back to, because I listened in on the discussion last week. So at either ends of the table, you had two ladies from NICCY, and one comes from a primary school, in fact, special needs setting, and one comes from post-primary. And the special needs primary setting, she indicated that it had very well represented their needs, and she did not see it as a dilution in terms of the needs for her education area and sector, whereas the post-primary individual did express the fear that it may well dilute qualifications. That is something that would need to be assessed as we go forward. It's not something we can answer now. It's something that needs to be reviewed as part of what we would intend to be able to take forward, especially with a new board on board, which is looking at routes into teaching, looking at the different qualifications that can lead you into a teaching role in a primary and post-primary setting in Northern Ireland, and standardising how we look at those, and then looking at the impact within legislation, because we have to represent the interests of all. What can we do in terms of our qualification rules, what they should recognise and what they shouldn't recognise? And again, the education sector will be involved in consultation on that as we move forward.
I completely haven't listened to, and it's in my constituency, the special needs school that you refer to. I completely respect the view that was given and understand what was being said. Nevertheless, I think in terms of fairness for teachers across the board, in terms of if they are paying for that sort of regulatory role, they need to make sure that the value that they've invested in themselves is treated fairly in relation to others. And I think it is also a problem that if people are looking at their options and see a cheaper route, not that there shouldn't be a cheaper route, but if people are considering that, you can see very easily how everyone may very easily tilt towards that, and that's a problem for our education system if it is when taken across the board, not in specific circumstances, a less rigorous qualification. So I really do think that's something that should be prioritised as moving forward. Thank you, Chair.
Okay.
David, I might pick this up again at the end. I'll bring others in, but it also, just when you're asking those questions and you're looking at the Transform Ed agenda, it has not without controversy, but the core content framework, I think, for initial teacher education. And if we're sort of going to be mandating that for our institutions here, but letting in, potentially teachers who haven't studied something which fits with that core content framework, the two things don't seem to align. So. And
it could be that reform in some way is right, but there needs to be a fair structure and a level playing field put in place so that everybody understands it. And it might be that a certain qualification will do for a particular area of teaching, but not for others. But we need to understand what that is. Thanks, Chair.
Kathy,
sure. It's just something I want to clarify, Ian, that you had said earlier around the time frame for those getting registered. I think it was 6 weeks you advertised, but it was generally 5 weeks. Is that the same for those? I forget the figure. You meant in and around 50 that got registered from the south who all met the criteria. Were they within that timescale as well, or do you have data on that?
What I would say, that example that I used was for those applying from, I think, England, Scotland or Wales background, the 6 weeks, which are usually registered within 5 weeks. We know that for total rest of world applicants, sort of outside of the UK at the minute, which Ireland will fall into, most applicants are being now accepted onto a register well within 8 weeks.
Okay.
When I joined and with the old system, it was taking some people 6 to 9 months.
Okay.
So
When you say most, do you have figures? Are there exceptions to that? To those who do meet the criteria?
the exceptions normally are that applicant who thinks they've submitted all their information to us and they haven't, there's something missing, or in the likes of, and Ireland is not as bad as other countries. When you have to go to other countries, for example, and ask for them to ensure and approve that yes, this applicant has this qualification that they're saying they have, it can sometimes take other jurisdictions longer to get back to us, but Ireland is pretty good, they're pretty quick on it. What I would say on that is also I regularly meet with my counterparts in Scotland, Wales and Ireland to talk about issues affecting us all, but application times does come up, and we do see if we need to where we can intervene and try and move people along, but largely it's an application by application process for each individual, and so they need to keep an eye on their emails, especially that they have set up their email address with us to make sure that we GTCNI isn't getting in touch with them and to ask them for information that they think they've already submitted.
But just to clarify finally though, those who do meet the criteria in the south, it's around 9 weeks for registration then?
It's probably closer to, I would say, 6 weeks, if not quicker than that. We can get figures in that and forward that, but
That'd
yeah.
be great, yeah. Thank you.
Kathy, Michelle, you'd indicated.
Thanks, folks. I just have one question. It's around clause 15 and commencements. It's not clear when most of the clauses will commence. I just wanted to get your view on that.
I think I'm just turning to it now.
It says all the bill will come into operation by commencement order, except for clauses 14, 15 and 16, which are kind of administrative really.
I think that's it's legislative speak in there, but I think the things that we know won't be enacted or commenced straight away were the earlier two clauses. I think it's clauses 7 and 8 on provisional registration, and then further training, I think, or further validation. I think those we have noted that the department intends that will only commence once there has been engagement with the teaching profession and also agreement by a new GTCNI board. So does that answer your question?
Does, and you're content with that?
Those bits, those clauses 7 and 8, that will only happen following consultation with the wider profession. I think yes, because we want to make sure we can get it right.
Yeah. Everything else, it depends on if and when legislation is approved, and then moving to processes to look at board appointments, etc. So in terms of commencement, we know there is an end mandate in terms of the current assembly, so we know there's only a certain amount of time for legislation to go through, so we would hope that we would be able to commence by April 2027 on those earlier clauses that are to do with more of the current operating business of the organisation and its service levels, but that is over to the processes that must be followed first before anything can be put in place.
Do you think that will have any lingering sense of uncertainty when you're trying to rebuild the trust with the membership, that kind of uncertainty around some of these clauses might be undermining in any way?
I think rather than undermine, I would look at it as a positive for the whole teaching profession as a whole, that they are going to have their say, be it their representatives. I know NICCY were in here last week, be it them or other people can put their views forward, and I think that's important to make sure that when we are considering things like potentially revalidation of teachers' accreditations and also for provisional registration, that it's important that the profession and other key stakeholders do have a say in it.
Maybe just pick up on that. I think in terms of obviously we're not in control of when this bill passes in the Assembly. We have a degree of control, but there are factors that are outside of members' control on that. But once this is, or if the bill in its current form becomes an act, as it's currently drafted, other than those fairly routine things around the short title of the bill at the end, there's really no sense of when any of this will actually be enacted, but you've spoken to the fact that this is really needed quite urgently, because as an organisation some things are kind of held that can't be progressed because you need the board to be in place. So, I mean, do you have a sense of how quickly you would want to see the department move to actually enact the clauses in the bill, or are you content that the department needs to be given the time to do this as it sees fit?
Well, I think in a sense, Chair, what you're actually seeing is day one, first meeting of a new GTCNI board, having a very busy agenda with things here are things that we need to consider very, very quickly, and those would be two things that are on it, because that we will know that we will want to commence that. The model that is being proposed is seen as good practice, and hopefully will make GTCNI the fit for purpose body it is. So try and get those things enacted as soon as possible, but giving the teaching profession its rightful place.
Okay, well, so maybe again some things to pick up with the department. Not seeing any other indications, so I do have one final question, and it's just, it really is picking up on that issue around the core content framework that's part of the Transform Ed agenda, but also you'd referenced, and again you were saying really you need this legislation to go forward to really give GTCNI the permission effectively to go ahead and make some of those more substantive changes, and one of those was around the core competencies for teachers. Do you foresee any tension with that if we have an agenda on Transform Ed which is running at its own pace and happening now, long before this legislation will see the light of day, setting in place a core content framework for the teacher training colleges which will dictate what teachers have to learn, and then will that almost put you into a scenario where you have to shape your core competencies around this, because that's what their Transform Ed is saying they have to be taught? And I know that some of the people involved in initial teacher education do have some concern around that core content framework and feel that it could be incredibly prescriptive and potentially infringing on academic freedom and all of that. So I just wondered if you have a view on that.
I think really in relation to the GTCNI's competences which it owns, there are currently 27 of them, and there were proposals a number of years ago to sort of condense them down into 12, and I think that had almost got through the council approval before the council was dissolved. So I think there is that recognition that yes, we can condense and make it more meaningful, and yet we do know that though GTCNI needs to be in a sense reformed, rebirthed, so that it can be that professional voice as well as body for teachers, and say here are the competences. And yes, they will link in with the core content framework because they will form a key part of that, but we need to ensure that we're involved in those discussions now. However, that said, GTCNI is just an organisation in the sense of officials at the minute. It needs that board to be up and running so that the teacher representation and the workforce can have its voice heard.
Yeah, because remember, whatever you say about whatever transpired with the last board, the board representing teachers owned those competences and created those competences. So that board needs to come back in to represent the profession, to own any changes to those competences, to tie in.
Yep.
Or perhaps
absolutely, I absolutely accept that. I suppose it probably again is a departmental question around whether the Transform Ed agenda and the revised competences that could arise out of this legislation are intention. So we can raise that with them. Can I just check, John? Are you looking to come in again before we wrap the session
just
up?
one follow up. So I asked a question about delays for teachers coming back from other parts of the UK. So is there not a backlog of registrations from teachers who are moving from Scotland to Northern Ireland? Are you saying that doesn't exist, or it doesn't?
I'm saying it doesn't exist because I'm not aware of it.
No, we don't have any.
That's the first I'm actually hearing of this.
I think you've got to remember too that when individuals graduate from England, England's graduation time is later in July.
Calendar is different.
And they're under pressure, obviously, when jobs start in September, so that they're maybe in a panic station. But our team are processing UK applicants, probably very similar to that of our Northern Ireland applicants, to be fair, but we can get you that data.
Yeah, we're steady.
Thank you.
52 per month at the moment.
Well, I think there are a couple of things which I'm sure the Clark's team will be in touch with, just a few bits of data that were requested, but I think other than that, that's brought the session to a close. So thank you for your time this afternoon.
Thank you, Chair and members, for the opportunity.
Yeah, not at all. Okay, so I think those bits of data that both Cathy and John were looking for have been noted for follow-up. Is there anything else other than that just being added to the evidence for the bill? No, we agree. No, you guys are good to go. Absolutely, yes, you're absolutely good to go. I don't think there's anything else. Are we content to move on to the next item on the agenda then? Okay. So that's item 8 on the agenda, members, and that is SL1, the Education Pupil Reporting Amendment Regulations NI 2025. So that's at page 182 of your packs, and then there's a further departmental response to some issues we had raised as a committee at page 190. So just for a very quick summary, for members' benefit, the purpose of the statutory rule is to remove the requirement for principals to provide a specific end of key stage assessment level of progression for each pupil at the end of key stages 1, 2 and 3 in the annual report to parents. So the Department have articulated this is because it has introduced system-level sample assessments in literacy and numeracy, which will be conducted among a representative sample of pupils in their final year of key stages 1, 2 and 3. So these outcomes will not be available to be reported on for all pupils. The statutory rule is subject to draft negative resolution by the Assembly. We initially considered the SL1 on the 10th of December and requested further information from the department, which has now been provided. So the letter that you have before you sets out the department's view that there's been satisfactory consultation with teachers and in their view very minimal impact on parents, so they perceived there's no perceived detriment to the rule for parents. I don't have anything to add to that. Obviously, we still have to hear from the examiner of statutory rules. But is there anything any members want to contribute in relation to this, or otherwise I'll probably put the question if we're content. Nothing to add. So on that basis, are members content with the proposed statutory rule? If they are, can we say that's agreed? Agreed. Agreed. Okay. So that will now go back to the department, and they will take that statutory rule forward. Okay, next item in the agenda then is item 9, and that's correspondence. So there's correspondence at pages 197 to 240 of your packs, and also in tabled papers. And there's a summary note at page 197. I will raise just any items which require discussion or decision by the committee. Other than that, we'll dispose of them as per the summary note, unless any member raises an item that I haven't identified. So item 9.3, page 207. It's correspondence from the Finance Committee providing a response from the Department of Finance on capital DEL allocations to the Department of Education and a breakdown of allocations made to Irish medium accommodation and facilities. So I'm happy to open this up to members if they have anything they want to raise on this. I think that perhaps it was Deputy Chair had precipitated this one. Deputy Chair, I'll bring you in first.
Chair, I've been speaking to Corley na Gael Scullianta, and they were informed by officials from the department that even though £6 million had been allocated for Irish medium, they were told that only 1 million of that 6 was to be released because the Minister had other spending priorities. And my understanding is that the Minister would have to go back to the executive to get approval for that, and he hasn't done it, and it's quite concerning, you know.
So we can certainly, is that something you're seeking to raise with the Minister to get clarity on that? Yeah. Okay. So I'm certainly happy. I think it's appropriate we would seek that clarity. Any other members have anything they want to raise on this one? So no, if we can agree to write then on that basis, that's agreed. Item 9.5, page 225 in your packs, it's correspondence from the Finance Committee, and it's asking the committee to provide its view on the draft budget by noon on Friday the 27th of February. Look, happy to hear members' views. I'm going to make a suggestion. I'll bring Michelle in a wee second. I'm going to make a suggestion. We may struggle as a committee to come to a unified position on the draft budget, so we may want to leave this one for parties to respond to, but I think, Michelle, you'd indicated...
Sorry, I meant to come in at 9.4.
Oh, right, okay, yes. No problem.
I had my
do you want
wrong.
Should we just dispose of this item and then we'll
yes, absolutely.
Revert back
That's
to
why I hadn't really properly indicated.
Sorry, was that 9.4 you'd said?
Yes.
Okay, no problem. Well, we'll cover this one off first and then we'll do that. So on the draft budget then, are members agreed that we...
I was going to say just how we propose that we, given what we understand there's division in the room, that leave it to parties to respond.
Parties have set their positions out pretty clearly on this already, so no, that's fine. So we'll move on from that. Look, happy to track back. I hadn't specifically highlighted 9.4, but Michelle, you wanted to speak to that?
Yeah, no, I was just flagging within that report, the PAC report, there had been information around the procurement stuff, and I was hoping we could get an update from the Department of the EA on how they are improving procurement processes for schools. It's an issue that's come up pretty much every school I go into, so just when I saw it in that report, I thought it would be useful to ask for that update.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm certainly happy to do that. Just in terms of anyone observing committee, I should just note that item 9.4, it's from correspondence from the Department of Finance and the memorandum of reply to the Public Accounts Committee report on managing the school estate. And so, Michelle, you're proposing we seek an update on the procurement.
There was stuff in there around the potential of delegated maintenance and enhanced school autonomy when it comes to some of the procurement. So I think that would be really helpful to get that.
Yeah, we've had the Minister set out that the direction of travel is to do something in that space, so I think an update on that would be good. Dana, you'd indicated there. Did you? No, I got that wrong. Okay. Anything else arising from 9.4? Are we agreed? Agreed. Item 9.6, page 227, it's correspondence from the Office of Mark Durkin, MLA, seeking an update on an earlier request for a meeting from North West Counselling. So just to refresh members' memories on this, we agreed as a committee on the 8th of October 2025 to schedule a departmental briefing on emotional health and wellbeing framework in schools, early intervention and mental health provision in primary schools, and we had written to North West Counselling to update them on this, and I think that the intention was to re-engage with them once we'd received that briefing, but it is looking in terms of sort of pressures on our work programme, that briefing from the department hasn't gone ahead as yet. Are members content? I'd be happy to suggest to arrange a preliminary informal meeting with North West Counselling and then seek a written briefing from the department in the meantime. We may be able to get them in, but it may well be after Easter at this stage if members are agreed. Yeah.
Agreed.
Okay.
Yeah.
Item 9.8, page 223. It's a response from the Department of Education regarding a capital project at St Louis Grammar School in Kilkeel. I'd be happy to propose that we share that with the principal of St Louis Grammar, who had contacted the committee on that. Is that agreed? It's a school I have visited. The project is definitely needed, and hopefully that is a positive update that the department have provided there. Item 9.9, page 235, is correspondence from the Department of Education, which is a copy of the ministerial statement that was issued last week on the public consultation report on establishing a dedicated organisation to support controlled schools. I'm happy to hear members' views. I would want to just put on record I do have ongoing concerns around this, and I'm not sure that the Minister identifying that there are gaps in terms of attainment levels potentially between maintained schools and controlled, that the solution to that problem has a clear evidence base, that a managing authority is what will sort that out.
There's no evidence whatsoever.
Yeah. So I do have a concern that a problem has been diagnosed, but I'm not sure where the solution has been plucked from. So there is obviously support in the consultation around some of the Minister's plans for those who have responded, but I would want to be clear to put on record that I don't think in the current context of the education system this is something that I would be encouraging the Minister to invest time and resource into. David?
Chair.
Sorry, I'll bring the Deputy Chair on to come in and then I'll bring you.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Just again, not to, I think we probably know each other's positions on much of this, but just to put on record, I think this is something that's positive and needed in the context of the education system as it currently sits. I understand there's aspirations and there has been recommendations that point elsewhere, but I think most of us around this table, if we were being frank, understand that is not a realistic or something that's likely to happen in the short to medium term. And given that, I think actually making sure that controlled schools have similar standing and representation as other sectors, I think is important, and therefore I think it's a positive move, and that's the position of our party. So just to put that on record. Thank you, Chair.
David, Deputy Chair.
There are a number of issues with this, Chair. First of all, and the Speaker has made reference to this on a number of occasions about ministers not making statements to the Assembly. This is released to the press the same time as we get it, basically. And the point that you have raised, that because Catholic maintained schools have a managing authority that's the reason for the better outcomes, the better educational outcomes in comparison to the controlled sector, and there's absolutely no evidence whatsoever to support that. The controlled sector does have a managing authority, and that's in the EA, and the EA has now set up a dedicated unit to deal with the controlled sector. And the other issue, as well as that lack of evidence, I mean, the Minister quotes the independent review on a number of occasions. The independent review recommended that there be one managing authority for all schools. Certainly not more bureaucracy in terms of setting up a managing authority for the controlled sector. So that's just my rant over.
No, I set that out at the outset. I completely agree with that. I do think that in the current budgetary context we're in as well, we have to be prioritising and not pursuing policy agendas that don't appear to have evidence attached to them. And in my view, going against the recommendations of the independent review and a single managing authority. I think we should be setting our ambitions there. I know David feels that's unrealistic, but I think we should be setting our ambitions a bit higher than that. I want to be very clear. I mean, I want to see every school and every sector succeed. I'm just not sure this is the way to do it, but we'll leave it there unless there's anything else to add. Sorry, Kathy.
Just to add to what the Deputy Chair has mentioned there around the written statements, I don't know whether this is normal procedure, but surely this is something where we should have had the opportunity to question the Minister directly on, rather than, I suppose, sitting here talking to ourselves about it. And it's not the first time, like I say, it's not the first time that this has happened, and I fear that it's not the last time that it's going to happen either. We're going to continue to get these.
It does feel more like a press release than a ministerial statement, and I do think that should always be preferable. I think that the Assembly have the opportunity to question the Minister on this. If it's important enough to make a statement, then let's have some scrutiny attached to it. Okay, I don't think there's anything else arising from that. Item 9.10 on page 240. It's a response from the Department of Education regarding December monitoring and a paper setting out spending on Irish medium education over recent years. So again, happy to open this up for members' views, or if we're content to note at this stage. It's great. Item 9.11, these are just a couple of bits in tabled papers. Page 15, response from the mental health champion following the smartphone-free childhood briefing. I'm going to propose at this stage we note there was some suggestion that there may be some material in there that was embargoed, potentially connected to a press release, and I'm not sure if it has been published or not, unless anyone from the clerk's team is aware. So I think until we've clarity on that,
I haven't seen it. We did look for it, Chair, and it wasn't
seen it. So I think today. Given that, probably not appropriate we discuss, but perhaps if any member wants to bring that back next week to discuss, we certainly can. But members have that, and it can be noted. Item 9.12, page 19 of tabled papers. This is correspondence that was sent to me as chair of the committee from a team of Queen's University researchers who recently launched their report into Religions and Worldviews Education for All, and they're offering a committee briefing on that. Time permitting, I would like to propose that we take that up. I don't think the committee's had a lot of opportunity to look at the outworkings of the recent Supreme Court judgment on this in detail. We know the Minister has taken forward work around a review of the RE syllabus, and I think it's a policy area it would be helpful for us to look at on the round. And I know from having attended that research launch, it was a really excellent piece of research which engaged with a wide range of stakeholders from across the whole spectrum in education around their views around religions and worldview education. I think it would be a helpful one if members are agreed. Agreed? Okay, other than that, are members content to dispose of the correspondence as per the summary note at page 197? Agreed? Agreed. So that takes us to the forward work programme, which is item 10 on your agenda. So just would direct members to the version in tabled papers, just in case there have been any updates on that. I would ordinarily ask the clerk to speak to it, but perhaps you may not have a huge amount to say on this subject. So I think at this point I'll seek committee's agreement to endorse the forward work programme as amended there in your packs, and we can pick up any more detailed issues at next week's meeting if we're agreed. Great. Item 11 is any other business. Is there any? No. So that's then item 12, date, time and place of next meeting, and that is scheduled for Wednesday the 28th of January 2026 at 2 p.m, room 29 and online. And that just leaves me to put the question that the committee meeting does now adjourn. Are we agreed? Agreed.
Agreed.
Okay, Jim, can I just check we've got the live feed off there?